Welcome to NENA Workgroup Leadership. You guys are in for a roller coaster ride today. If I'm going too fast at any point in time, please slow me down. I've been told by folks that I talk a little bit fast at times, and I won't be planning on going really fast, but I do tend to sometimes go too fast. Okay, so we are going to talk about how you run a NENA workgroup. And you know who I am. And here's the main things that we're going to try to cover today. If we don't finish today, we can come back at another time and pick up more stuff. The one thing that I would also recommend is when you get to a point that you want to go over how do we handle workgroup comments and stuff, we can do like very high level today, but come back and do a more detailed discussion of how to walk through and load stuff into NENA Workspace and resolve comments and stuff like that. And hopefully by that point in time, the references workgroup will have that all well documented and it'll be a lot easier. So I'm going to just touch briefly on what the different leadership roles are, talk about where there's training materials and templates that you can access now. Now, a lot of them aren't up to date, but at least I'll start pointing you in the right direction. And then main things that you're going to want to focus on today is the leadership startup activities, what you need to do before your first meeting, what you're going to do during your first work group meeting. And I don't have it on here as I see it already, but probably navigating the NENA workspace should be in here as a specific item because we are going to do that. And then from there, it's what you need to do week to week to manage your meetings and all your documents. As part of that, there's also membership management. What do you do when somebody hasn't been attending, what their different roles are as far as they're an active workgroup member versus an authorized observer. So how do you demote them, so to speak, as far as their responsibilities? And what do you do if somebody comes in the middle of the process? How do you onboard them? And then there's the outside evaluation and comment review process. Once your document's written, how do you get it to that goal line?
Cheryl, I don't think I shared this, but the document that the work group they're going to co-chair has already been started some time ago, installed, and they're picking it back up.
Okay.
Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that they won't still need to go through, is this still the direction we should be going? Because it's been stale for a couple of years now, right? So anything that you may be offering in the training about even having to start those discussions on getting your document started, I think would still be relevant.
Yep, I think there's a couple places that I mentioned, and maybe it's not in here so much as it is in notes and other templates where, for example, you may already have a document that you need to put out there and you're doing another revision or updating it. It needs to get pushed into the most recent template. And that's a step that's kind of a pain in the butt, but it needs to get done for consistency. But pretty much the same things that are going to happen apply regardless.
Before, I'm one of those people who likes to follow along with where we're at. Have we been given access into this group yet?
Into the work group that you're going to be leading?
Yes.
So Sandy, if you go to that work group homepage, you would know that for sure because their names would all be listed under contact.
Yep, I'm going to go look real quick.
Because I'm under, is it under PSAP Operations Committee?
Yeah, so in NENA Workspace,
yeah,
under PSAP Operations, and I'm stalling on the name of the work group.
I know it's scheduling, but it's daily personnel operations, I believe.
That's what it is. Yes, it is. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I was working on a different one this morning.
Yeah, it's blank right now.
Yeah, the group leaders are blank right now. So no, let me get a hold of Delane because I thought Pete had already did outreach to get this done, but we'll follow up again.
Okay. No, I mean, hey, when Cheryl, you gave that first crash course at SPP, I can at least manage myself to find this at least. That's about as far as I can get now.
Yep. So you see what I just put up on the screen? Oh, crud, it went away.
Really quick, not that good.
So what you'll see on your page when you get set up is there will be this contact chairs.
Yeah.
That's under here. And once your names are here, then you should have all the administrative access. And to know for sure if you have administrative access, when you open settings, you should see an administration panel, moderation, and events. It gives you higher level things than if you're just a work group member.
Yeah, I see like on this one, it's got the little lock and says view only. So
Yep. So that's what Delane will get set up for you. Anything else before we go forward? Again, feel free to interrupt because that's how you guys are learning. All right. So someplace in the 20 screens I have open on my other computer, I have to find where we are. Okay. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 PowerPoints open. There we go. All right. Working group leadership roles. So when you start a work group, there are 3 primary roles that are typically assigned. You have someone who kind of takes the lead role of lead cat herder, and they're the ones who facilitate the discussion. There's also someone who's going to be responsible for managing a document. They're the ones who are editing it live on screen. They're going to be posting agendas and meeting notes and stuff like that as necessary. And they're also the ones who are going to start the Zoom session. There's also the person who's doing the note taking, monitoring the chat box during the session. They're also keeping an eye on the Zoom attendance link and making sure people have their first and last name in there. And should someone join by a phone call, they're also going to update that information. And the one thing that as a co-chair sometimes that it's hard to do is take a step back and say, okay, it's not just me and my opinion. We are stewards of helping this group of people, these subject matter experts, get this document to the goal line in a fair and a consensus manner of decisions, and in a, I don't want to say fast as possible, but in a reasonable time frame so that it doesn't dilly-dally. And with you guys picking up a document that's dilly-dallied for far too long, you'll understand how to keep it hopefully going forward and dealing with the stuff that you have to deal with. And if something is not truly necessary and within scope, is to push it off to the side so that you can keep progress moving forward. So if you're the facilitator, there are a couple of good things that you want to make sure that you understand is you're kind of in control of the situation and you all have access to that mute button and you can stop people if they won't be quiet, but typically you just try to talk over them and say, excuse me, and then they'll eventually be quiet. While you have to have pretty reasonable speaking skills and hopefully know something about the subject, you don't have to be the be-all, know-all person. You just need to know enough about the subject in order to keep the conversations going along and understand where you might need to probe the conversation a little bit to see where you need to pull something out of people or to get down a certain path. You're also that cheerleading, getting people to be involved and engaged so that you can get to the goal line faster by having them talk about the issues and help to try to resolve them so that it's not when you get to the comment review period that their concerns are coming up. The other thing is you have to be a little bit thick-skinned because people are gonna, not like the way something's going, and they may not like the way you're thinking of how leading a conversation. So you can't take things personally, but you are able to contribute to that discussion too. It's perfectly fine for you to say, hey, as a work group member, this is what I would think. Or, from representing my organization, this is what I would think, not necessarily as a co-chair, but as, who you represent. And then there's that whole issue about consensus and making sure people understand that there are 3 of you. Conversations go all over the place. And if you have a lot of people, you may find using the chat box is a great way for people to voice their opinions, but you have to keep an eye on it. And so while the note taker is typically watching it, all 3 of you really need to be involved in it. And then the other thing is people are coming and going from your meetings, but the key thing you want to try to do is end on time so that people can jump off to other calls or meetings that they might have. a lot of times in work groups, people have said, well, let's wait, 3, 4, 5 minutes to start the call. I've kind of gotten into the habit of, within 1 or 2 minutes of a call starting is to get going and remind people, hey, we start at this time. We know you might have to jump off another call, but we can't wait 5, 10 minutes for people to show up. So you need to actually keep things moving along. If you're one who's going to be responsible for managing the document, you're going to have to be, put on your organizational hat because there's a lot to keep track of. You'll update the notes. You may be the one who drafts agendas. Now, some work groups have the person who's doing the notes do the agenda. So that's going to have to be a decision amongst you if you want the person who's doing the document management to put out the agendas or have the person who's doing the notes do both the notes and agendas. I've seen it being switched more recently to, since our new notes and agenda form is the same, that the person who's doing the notes finds it's just easier. They finish the notes, they strip out all the stuff that was completed, and then they add new things onto it, and they kind of take the responsibility for that form. The person who's editing the document, you are doing live editing. People have to they've all been there. They all know how it is to be typing live in front of people. You're going to make mistakes. Don't worry about it. Everybody's done it before. If you can have 2 screens at least up at the same time or off on a side, you have documents you might need to reference, or you might also have websites that you want to have to pull over during the discussion to show them. Have that all up and ready to go before the meeting starts. You'll also be responsible for posting your document once you've got it updated after the call to the NENA workspace. And you want to do that in a reasonable amount of time. Even if there's things in it that you want to clean up afterwards, I found it's very helpful to send a copy of it to your note taker, because there's stuff in there they may want to copy and paste out of that you had put in there, or just as a reminder of what was actually talked about when they go to clean up the notes after the call. Again, they'll be the ones setting up the Zoom session. They'll help monitor and put polls into the chat box as necessary. And the other thing, since you are setting up the Zoom session, remember to make the other co-chairs a co-host so they can help with updating names in the Zoom call, or if something comes up and you do have to unexpectedly leave the call, that you'll be able to drop the call and the conversation continue on. And then the person who does the note taking, they're going to be the ones who are going to fill out the agenda notes form and summarize the discussions that are occurring during the official meeting, and then post those notes. They're going to need to be able to keep an eye on the chat box, keeping an ear to the conversation. The one thing that I think it's important to note, that when you're doing notes, not to write down everything somebody said, but basically summarize the high level discussion, so that if you weren't at a meeting and you came back between looking at the document, what additional information would you need to know about why a decision was made? So kind of capture high level items in there. As far as technically, the Zoom session, I mentioned it before, that you're going to have voice only participants. One thing that they don't realize when they dial in is we don't see anything but their phone number. We don't know who they are. And in Zoom, that's where you'll capture the attendance, is from the Zoom administrative area. And if their phone number isn't converted to a name, you won't know who that is. And they technically won't get credit for being on the call unless you know exactly who it was by their voice. You also all have the ability to mute people, so that if somebody doesn't realize that they're not muted, you can go ahead and mute them by being a co-host. And also, hopefully people don't put you on hold and you get the music, but unlike the former system that we used to have, at least you don't have to kick them out of the call. I believe that you can just mute them. So any questions about the roles before we get into looking at the materials that are available? Okay, so before the work group actually starts, there's some key things you want to do. You're going to want to become familiar with where your resources are. There are several administrative documents that you'll need to prepare if you haven't done so already. You'll need to set meeting logistics if you don't already have the day and time of the phone call that's going to occur each week established. You'll need to do that. You'll need to get on and prepare the NENA workspace, and then you're going to want to do some initial outreach to the work group members and get them prepared so that you can hit the ground running when the group starts. So there is this development group guide, and you can all bug Pete about it because he's on the work group too, who's helping to get this up to date. But it's basically on our NENA knowledge base website, which is a public website. You don't necessarily need an account to log into it, but you might want to get an account for it. It does focus specifically on how to run a work group. This is all information that we're probably going to reorganize and continue to update over time, but keep coming back to it so that you can find information in there. And the one thing I'll say is that if at any point you're looking for information and either seems out of date or you can't find it, or you have a question about it, feel free to contact me, because that will help me understand where we still need to improve things, sometimes sooner rather than later. The other thing that's going to be in there right now, there's a lot of text, is we're going to try to add more screen captures to help you navigate to where something is. Sometimes when you just see text, while we do have links to things, it's easier to actually see when you get to that site what you have to click on. The other thing that you should all have access to is within NENA Workspace, there is administrative procedures and templates and training materials. So I'm going to bring this page back, and to find where it is, you would go under communities and look for my communities, and it should be the very first thing that's there. So this is the folder you go into, and you'll be able to find under Workspace various templates and documents. So there's a bunch of stuff that I've been updating that isn't in here yet, or there's an older version of it. And you can go in here and you'll see that the ADM forms 3, 10, and 11 have their own folder. There's some training materials that get updated. Document templates and forms are the two that I reference a lot in the training that you'll want to go to. So one of the next things that you'll want to do before the work group starts is, do you have your charter done yet? There's a charter form, that's the ADM 011, that you can get off the folder structure I just show you. What you'll want to do is see if there were any special instructions that were in ADM 010 from the NENA DSC with your group. I don't believe there is any special instructions because the document's been out there and just needs to get updated. Okay, I'm seeing an issue right here. There is a DSC issue submission form that was originally created. I don't know if there was a new ISF redone for your work group for doing the update. I don't think there is. Is there, Sandy?
No, because this was a document that was started but not finished.
Yeah,
Picking
so
back up where the last work group, and so there should have been a charter. And I'm going through NENA Workspace right now.
yeah, and if you can't find a charter, I would recommend creating one, because you want to limit what you're going to have to focus on in this review. So if you don't yet have one, this is an opportunity for you guys to narrow your focus on what you have to accomplish in order to get this document out of the way.
So I'm trying to keep up here. Hold. This ADM 011, we need to go ahead and pull this up and resubmit it.
If you don't have one, you'll want to at least create a charter so you can tell everybody what you're focusing on in this review, so you don't feel like you have this incredible amount of work you have to do. You want to really limit what you need to accomplish.
Okay, so there is a charter. I am gonna email the group with it.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great, thanks, Sandy.
And if you guys look at it and you decide we need to narrow something, I would suggest doing that. And the DSC would have to approve it, but it will just help you guys stay more focused. But if it's loosey-goosey enough that you don't need to do that, then that's good too, because then you can say, well, that really wasn't in our charter. We only had, these things to cover.
Sure. Who would the best people be to, I guess, verify that? Not knowing what the original ISF was, or what the charter intention was. there could be some lost in translation kind of verbiage. Is that something we should work with Sandy and Pete on?
Yes,
that-
so work group chairs should work on charters with their committee co-chairs, and they will help take any updated charters back to DSC to get it approved. And usually there's not a lot of problem getting updated charters approved.
Great, thank you.
And then we're going to look at, we already have a charter, but who, when you say email the DSC, who exactly is that? Or am I missing something?
So the DSC is comprised of 2 co-chairs, which are Jim Shepard and Wendy Rooney. And then the members of the DSC are all of the committee co-chairs of the NENA committees.
Okay.
So like Pete and Sandy are committee co-chairs. I'm a committee co-chair for the document administrative work group. So I'm also one of them, but you work through your committee co-chairs and they will help you get it. Sometimes the committee co-chairs say, go ahead and email it directly to Delane to get on the DSC. It's up to your committee co-chairs and how they want to formalize your work through them.
And so like, this is a basic question, and I apologize. So this is under PSAP operations. So it's the work group chairs of PSAP operations, where like 988 is under PSAP logistics, that those are different chairs, correct?
My understanding is yes, they would be different.
Okay, just making sure I
Yep.
keep it up.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to be a committee co-chair of multiple work groups.
Well, and so the 988 is actually the oversight falls with PSAP logistics, but Pete is participating to as well to kind of keep an eye on the PSAP operation side.
Okay, so now I'm finally cooking with gas here. I get it. I opened operations committee and I see you, the 2 of you, Sandy and Pete. So that's, I'm okay. I feel good now. I get it.
Although my name's spelled wrong. I haven't told Delane yet. Okay. I already asked so much of her. I don't want to like do that.
Okay, now you guys already have a starter document. There's a template, and you can find the template under workspace document templates. So here, if you're updating an existing document, you want to move your existing content into the template if the template is newer. And that was last updated earlier this year. So obviously there's a new version of it. You'll want to capture it. It does remove a few sections, which is nice, and makes other sections optional. So there might be the capability to remove some of those sections that deal with operational impacts or things like that if you don't feel some of them are relevant to your particular document.
I was gonna tackle that and I decided to wait for this meeting because I started reading in some of these things. It was really the hyphen thing that stressed me out. Other than the hyphen thing, it's just copy and paste and just pay attention to that. Is that correct?
Yes, and yeah, the hyphen thing, I'm wondering if before you do a copy paste, if in Word you can, I think you might be able to kind of do like a reverse of it and select everything in the document and do a search and replace for a hard coded hyphen and replace it with a regular hyphen. I think that there's a way to do that.
Okay, but beyond that, everything, the numbers on the side are kind of built into the template. It's not going to mess them up.
Theoretically not, but
Okay.
it all depends on who edited your document previously and what kind of rogue characters are hidden behind the scene. When I've done style editing, what I've found is I'll turn on that little paragraph symbol and just kind of scan through the document to see if there's some weird stuff going on.
Okay.
And when all, do it on a copy when you do it. When all else fails, you can give me a call and I can try to see if I can figure out why you may have ran into an issue. The biggest problem that typically happens is in a tracking version of a document, somebody struck something out and it kind of hit the carriage return, which was right before a new section. And so the section numbering got lost. And you don't really see that in a tracked version. It's when you turn off the tracking. Will you be copying text that's tracked into the template then? Because there's already changes in it, or no, you're starting with, this is just the text and now we need to update it.
I believe it's the second. I don't think they got to comments, but I need to look.
I'm gonna send you I'm also sending, which is taking so long, I'm sending you the current document, the last agenda and the last note.
Okay.
Okay, and just until you have access and you can do all this
Yeah.
on your own.
I mean, but like when I opened this template up that was on there yesterday, Cheryl, like
Mhm.
there's like this section like 2.2 describing interfaces for XML and JSON objects. Why is that part of the template? That's where I got confused of like,
It is now part of the template.
okay,
And you'll notice that those are optional sections that if you don't use that in your document, you do not need to include it. That
Okay,
should
so-
be in the red text somewhere.
okay, so you can't, it just says if it says do not put, I'm just sorry. So I can just delete it. And so our 2.2 would be a different 2.2, just as an example.
Correct. It would be what's in the template is 2.3,
Okay.
the next section down. Yep.
All right. I'll probably
Any-
have more questions on that when I get to it, but
Yeah, when you're going to work on that, just shoot me a heads up to see if I'm around so that as you go through it, you'll be able to call me or ping me with questions.
okay.
Because if I know you're going to be on at a certain time, I'll just make sure that if I don't have anything else going on, that I can be in my office to help you out if necessary. Because there are weird things that even with the template, when I was updating a document recently, I stumbled upon that I wasn't expecting.
Okay. We'll figure it out.
Okay, yep. Okay, another thing is there is an attendance tracking spreadsheet that we recommend people use because NENA Workspace doesn't track excused absences. Is your document an ANSI document? Do you guys know? Is it an ANSI standard?
I believe it is, but I don't know that for sure, I guess.
It would have on the
Yes.
front page
Yeah.
ANSI
There's
candidate,
a
right?
Yeah, there's a pins in here. I can send the pins document too.
Okay, so one of the things that they follow in the process is making sure that attendance is tracked, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, NENA Workspace doesn't deal with the excused absences. There's no way to track it. And we talked in document management before about, is there a way that we could do something within the system, but then we found that people could game the system. And even if they didn't attend a meeting, if they kept their emails about, hey, don't forget to remind you about going in and tracking your attendance, they could go 4 months later and go back and change all their attendance to, hey, I was there, even though they never showed up. So there's no way to do anything within NENA Workspace. So one of the things that you can just do is keep track of it in a spreadsheet. And pretty much the person who's doing notes, they go down. And this is something I created several years back, and there's a version of it that's out on NENA Workspace, but I have documents that I can shoot you guys the draft versions of them, and you're more than welcome to use them, where you go in and the only people you really have to keep track of is the people who are work group members. If you have people coming in that are authorized observers, you don't need to keep track every week. I only mark them if they show up so that we know when they were involved in a particular conversation, especially if they have, want to come back and complain later. You can see exactly what meeting they attended and whether or not they were there when that was covered. So this is something too that my understanding from Delane is because of how documents are supposed to follow ANSI processes, she is still saying that we have to go into NENA Workspace and make sure everyone is recording their attendance. And if they didn't record their attendance, their absence, you as the work group co-chair can do it. And by having the spreadsheet, it's really easy, whether you sort them by their first name or sort them by their last name, to go into NENA Workspace and just go down and find the ones that didn't mark it and check it off. And I recommend just be mean to people on the work group calls when you start and say, you need to go in and spend the 5 seconds it takes you to go in and click that thumbs up with the email that just came an hour ago. Right, Sandy?
But in fairness, I mean, because the 988 group is really good, the emails
Mhm.
haven't been coming out. So you have to
Yeah.
make extra concerted effort to go find it these days.
So that is supposedly been resolved, that they should be getting those email messages an hour before the meeting. And if they're not, we're theorizing it might be because the meeting series was set up so long ago. But what I would recommend telling people to do is, oh, wrong one, is go into their, where did my little thing go? Okay, so if you go into your work group and you go into community home, of course, this one's not going to have it. Let me go into a different one. If you go into, tell them to just go to their event. Of course,
Yeah.
this is one that doesn't have events, and click on the meeting there at the beginning of the meeting. I have to find one where I have a meeting.
No, I
that's
totally
scheduled.
know how to do it because I've been doing it. You're right. It worked for my technical work group this week.
Mhm.
For a while there. It made you learn the system to go find it. But that's exactly what I was doing. I was going to community, opening it and saying, yes, I was there.
Yep, just go to the events, click on that meeting and open it there. And so that you can just as co-chairs remind them of that during that opening session in the meeting minutes. And the other thing that I
Sure.
recommend to co-chairs is if after a couple weeks, specific people are not going in and recording their attendance, is shoot an email with all those people who aren't recording their attendance and say, hey folks, it's a lot of extra work for us to have to go in and do this. And we're already have a big overhead running this group. Can you please remember to go in and record your attendance? Keep your email, even if you're not going to be here when it comes in, and follow it after the meeting, because that's the only way that you can get into it after the meeting and record your attendance. Someone have a question?
Just a comment, Cheryl. Do you have your Dev NENA tab still available that you could put on the screen?
Mhm. This one that you want?
Actually, where I want to go is, oh no, you're on Wiki.
Oh, you want to go to the other one?
NENA Workspace, and I
This
want you
one.
just to click on the home.
This one.
Yep.
So you see the event
And what you're
calendar.
going to get is a calendar. And if your people, and they can get to this, if they click on the meeting on that calendar, it will go directly to the meeting for that day.
Oh, that's a good hint too. Making a
And
note.
they can do their thumbs up, thumbs down, did I attend? And the link to actually get into the meeting is right there beside it. So
Cool.
if you're involved in multiple work groups, I found it's easier to go from the calendar than it is to try to jump back and forth and navigate through the different work groups themselves. But it's for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
Cheryl, on your attendance sheet, does it have, I know ANSI needs a balanced work group. So does it have that as far as categories that you've kind of shoehorned people into, or is that yet coming?
Actually, it's not showing up on here because my screen capture didn't go far enough over. But one of the things that I added in the roster and the spreadsheet is a work group balance tab. And so when you get somebody who requests to join, so I'll just walk through it right now. You have your names will go here. This is just to show for folks that when you put, P for present, E for excused, A for absence, these are all set up already as formulas. So it will keep track of it each week for you, how many attended. And it will also count for a person. So if you are, we've used this in some of my work groups to determine whose name should get into the document if they didn't end up showing up until later in the process. Yeah, they may have showed up for 5 meetings, but if there were 50 meetings, is 10% of the time really good? Did they really contribute during that, or were they just listening in the background and never did anything?
Yeah.
So you can use that as well. The work group balance over here, there is, you can then copy their names in here if you want to record their organization and then what their voting role is. And right now, I don't think we are specific in ADM 001 on whether or not the balance includes whether they're a primary voter or an alternate voter. And so I don't think it's specific. So it's the people who are actually showing up as members, not authorized observers, but members. And then you can just fill this out. And I've kind of done the same thing. There's formulas in here that will count them up, and then it will do the percentage for you. So you can see where, you might be light in one category or the other.
Right, great.
So that's built into here. If people want to use it, it's there. They're not required to use it, but I did it because we were having so many people coming and going from some of our work groups. We were losing track of, are we still balanced or not? And this was a quick way to keep track of it. As long as we're here, the attendance record, once you put their names in, then it's just weekly putting in the date and whether or not they attended. I have a tab here for workspace roster. And all that is when you go into NENA workspace, you're able to download a contact list so that you have the email addresses and phone numbers of people who are work group members and authorized observers. It's just a copy and replace. There's nothing to do with it. But if you're trying to get hold of someone, instead of having to jump into NENA workspace, navigate into your system, find that person, you can just open up your spreadsheet for your attendance and find their email or their phone number if you need to get hold of them, or if you needed to know what organization they were in or whatever. It's real easy to just do that. And then I've added these who's resigned items in here. So if you ever need to go back, and before you undo somebody from the group, it's just copying from attendance record into resigned attendance and workspace roster into resigned roster. You're just basically taking those records and copying them over into another spreadsheet so that if you needed to ever know who had left and when they left, you can have it referenced there. Again, these aren't required, but these are just some things that I was already doing. And if you find it useful to you, you can do that. Okay. I think that's it for that one.
Real quick before we go off of that one, if past co-chairs kept this for the future, are we going to have to show those previous meetings, or are we starting fresh when we restart the work group?
You should be starting fresh. All the old information is in there. It should be retained, but it would be too difficult to go back and figure out. Plus, you're going to do a new call for volunteers. And so the volunteers, some may be the same, but some won't. So I would just start fresh.
Thank you.
That's probably cleaner and easier for you guys too. And I would just keep, if they did have the spreadsheet, just keep it. If someone ever asks about it, you have it in your system somewhere.
And that spreadsheet isn't posted in the NENA workspace. So I wouldn't, if there was one that happened previously, I don't think we'd be able to find it in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, there really is no place in NENA workspace that's set aside for the committee, or excuse me, the work group co-chairs to share files. So a lot of times what you could do is just go into any of the folders that are there. If you need to share something with each other and you don't want to do it via email because it's big, you could just post it on NENA workspace. There's probably a folder that's not being used. You could dump it into if you want to keep it there and just not tell the work group members that it's there so they can't go in and change it on you. Although they'd have to repost it. So it is kind of a static thing.
And you'd have to remember to go in and say, hey, don't tell everybody about it, because NENA workspace just automatically notifies everybody that's uploaded.
Right. You have to uncheck the box.
Yeah.
So a best practice might be to have like a Google Drive or something shared between the co-chairs, just to have some of these documents accessible.
Yeah, I've done that on a couple other work groups that, somebody's organization, they might have a SharePoint site or a shared Google Drive that everyone's able to access, and we've put stuff in there. We do that a lot of times for draft meeting notes. So whoever's taking notes, they throw the draft up there and say, hey, it's here, go ahead and make any changes or add stuff as needed. And then they can go in and do that. And then everyone says, hey, I'm done. And then they know to go back, clean any last thing up, and they can grab it and post it officially on the NENA workspace.
Okay.
I would not recommend that you keep your your standards document on a Google Drive. We've seen shifts or what do you want to call corruption in the document in trying to translate it from a Google Doc back into a Word doc. I think even one of our other co-chair from another work group, they like had to try to figure out how to reinvent their document. So
Ouch.
it's not, I mean, as long as you're super savvy and you can figure all that out, but if it's not something you normally do, I know that when the state went to Google, one thing that Google doesn't like is all the line numbers. It doesn't support line numbers in the document. And of course, the document itself has the line numbers. They may have changed it since then, but just a couple things to keep in mind.
Absolutely. No, I'm much more comfortable in Word. I do not like the Google Doc, but I like Google Drive and to be able to share
Mhm.
documents back and forth. So, and I've seen some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've moved some Google stuff into the Word template before. And the easiest thing that I found was to copy the text in Google, but when you paste it into the template, paste it in as plain text so that it doesn't try to do any of the formatting.
Okay.
And then you may have to go back through your template when you're done and make sure that the headings are, the heading number 2 or, whatever the style is in the original template, because that's what drives the table of contents. If any of that made sense.
Yes, it absolutely does.
Okay.
Yep.
I think also, I mean, sometimes I'm pulling it up right now, the work group, the 988 work group, we're just working on a plain document and it hasn't been put in the template with all the numbers and whatnot. And that probably helps too, but then that will be on the co-chairs to have to do that heavy lift, right, into that bigger document.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. At some point they got to do that. And it's fine to do it locally as they're doing as just a plain vanilla document, but they will have to put it into the format at some point.
Okay.
So the one thing I mentioned about that other place where the roster is, it's under workspace. And when you click on roster, you'll see there's an exports, and this spreadsheet will end up downloading, and it's just a CSV file. And it will, just copy and paste it out. Of course, it opened on my other one. You can look at it and then you can sort it however you want to sort it by first name, last name, organization. This is also helpful for determining if you've got duplicate organizations being represented, because you have to sort out voting rules at some point too. So that's how you actually access that particular spreadsheet that I had mentioned. Okay, do you guys already have your meeting set up? You know when you're going to have it, what day of the week and times?
We have set it up for Thursdays. Gary, help me out. Is it what time?
I think it's 1 p.m.
Okay, so if you hadn't, the other thing like the calendar Pete mentioned is to check and make sure you aren't overlapping another key group that you might want members from, because people can't be in 2 work groups at the same time. And do you already have your first date identified and when you're going to meet?
I think we were waiting on this training first and
Okay,
for them
so-
to get a little bit caught up on their moving the template and everything.
Yep. So once you get all your background stuff done and have a date picked, you'll be needing that date to tell people when your first meeting is going to be. And it sounds like you're going to be doing a call for members too. So you'll probably want to, do a call for members a couple weeks before your first date's going to be, but not wait too long. We've had the other thing happen where NENA's issued a call for members and then the work group chairs are spending 3 months trying to get folks to sign up ahead of time, and you end up having to go back and say, hey, are you still going to be available? You said 3 months ago, and by then their availability changes. So that's something to keep in mind too. Another thing you'll want to do once you guys are all up on the NENA workspace is there are some things you'll want to preload into the NENA workspace for your work group members. So your approved charter, your draft document should be up there. and then you'll have your meeting series up there and register all your members. So that's stuff that you'll do in advance. I will give you a warning that I learned the hard way when I was creating a new series of meetings to handle comments. Is I set up a series for like 2 months, and then we ended up having to cancel the first meeting. And if you ever set up a series and have to cancel your first meeting, it eliminates all the rest of the meetings as far as sending out notifications. So you almost have to go in and delete it and then reestablish an entire new meeting series. So don't schedule your meeting series until you really are certain you have that first date.
And Delane just emailed back and says the work page, NENA workspace page has been set up.
Yay.
So Leanne, I
Nice.
did notice that not all of your name was captured, and I emailed her back about that.
Okay, thank you.
So once you have a lot of that backdrop information settled, you've got your charter, you've got your document, and you're getting ready to go, you're going to want to send an introductory letter via email to your work group members. And there is a template, and I've updated Sandy since we've even done it and tried to streamline it a little bit more. But you want to include some of your core information about the call logistics and meeting participant expectations on them being a member of the work group. And as part of that, there's some links and some read aheads that are in here. So we tell them you need to read the IPR policy, you need to read the ethics and the code of conduct policy. We want you to read that section within an ADM 001 that talks about what your expectations are. There's a paragraph or two in there. And then also remind them about, in writing, if you miss 3 meetings, you can be removed from the work group, or basically remove your voting privileges is what we talk about doing now. You want them to look at the charter before they come in there, and you want them to get that meeting series on their calendar. And all that's now documented as bulleted items in a list for them. And then there's just some general information about, the NENA workspace is going to be used, making sure that they have their account, that if they're the person who's voting, that they're required to vote in all the ballots, and that they must contribute to the discussion. The one thing that I don't have in here at this time is anything about authorized observers, because I think authorized observers kind of come along later in the process, where it's somebody who started out with the work group and then they got busy and they couldn't attend anymore, but they really want to, continue to be able to pop in when they can, or provide text, or pop in on some of the discussions that happen via email. So they may be an authorized observer. That information isn't in here right now. And if you guys have some suggestions about that as you start working through your work group, we're going to be looking for some feedback on that, because this is kind of all new. Up to a couple months ago, the only people who were authorized observers were the DSC co-chairs and NENA staff. So by opening it up, we need to figure out if there's any additional guidelines we need to put around that. There's, I think, one thing in here that I did say about voting, or not voting, but attendance. We said that the 3 strikes and you're out type thing it doesn't apply to authorized observers. They don't have to let you know they can't make a call. They can if they want, which is fine, but they don't have to.
Where is, I'm trying to find this document, and I'm under documents forms. What's the name of it?
You won't find it because this is one that I've just updated.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah,
Sorry,
so I'm going to email you guys a couple different documents after
Okay.
our training, or things that I've been working on this past week. And they were going to continue to undergo update, and they haven't been reviewed by the references working group
Okay.
yet either. So, but you're more than welcome to start with them, so you're not running blind. Okay, so those are kind of your resources. Is there anything about resources before we go into what happens at your first meeting?
Good.
Okay, so the key thing to note is your kickoff meeting is going to set the tone and expectations of what you as co-chairs are going to deem as important and how you want to operate and run your meetings. The other thing to remember, especially with your document, is that it is an ANSI candidate document. So there are rules that have to be followed, and procedures and processes, which can be very annoying at times, but they need to be followed and managed. So there are key things that you'll want to go over in your first meeting. You want to, introduce yourselves as co-chairs. You're going to want to talk about the IPR antitrust policies, what the expectations of the work group members are versus NENA, and then talk about your document development process and your timeline goal for trying to get to the end of that work. And then I always recommend, especially for people who may not have been on NENA work groups in a while, or they've never been on them, is how do you get through and navigate on NENA Workspace? So on your first working group meeting, this, by the way, this PowerPoint that I have, eventually this is also going to be posted on the NENA guide so that you can go in and reference this stuff as well. But there's actually links within the NENA knowledge base where we have the ethics and code of conduct policy statement that you have to read on the very first NENA meeting of the work group. You only have to read it then, that first time. It's very short. And you want to tell everybody that, this applies to everyone on all our calls and also any written communication that occurs. The same with the IPR antitrust policy. That particular document, it's a little bit longer that you have to read it, but you only have to read it on the first meeting. Right now, ADM 001 says that it has to be read at the first meeting in a calendar year. And if you actually go into the IPR policy, the full one, it says that there too. That has not been changed. And Pete and Sandy, do you recall discussion in DSC where we thought that that was no longer going to have to be done?
Yeah, I think first of the year, maybe, I don't know. I don't remember now.
I don't remember the discussion.
Yeah, and the way that they may have worded the full policy, it could be that it could be interpreted that you no longer have to do that on the first meeting of the year. But for you guys, hopefully you'll finish your stuff for the end of the calendar year and you won't have to worry about it. But the references work group is also going to have to vet all this information. So we'll have it figured out before then. But there are links to it right here within the presentation that will take you to the NENA knowledge base, and the URL too is also written there that you'd be able to use.
So I'm trying to follow along with that. And I couldn't find it. So I just, in the search the knowledge base, I typed the code of ethics. And it links me back to the national NENA page. Is that the right one?
Let's see. Now it's not going to let me do it right from running the presentation, is it? Okay, so there's to do the antitrust and it's calling up ethics. Okay, so it should be on the NENA knowledge base.
Yep. And so I thought there was something to read. Oh, you just have to read that?
You have to read this stuff that's right here.
Perfect. Okay.
And we pulled that out of the NENA.org site and put it in here. And hopefully, the same thing with the intellectual property rights policy. It's this part that is next to the line. Now you'll notice we have in bold where you're supposed to put your committee name in here. So a thing that you could do if you want is you could copy this text out in both of these and stick it at the bottom of your agenda. And then it's also in your agenda and notes for that particular meeting too.
Okay.
That might actually be easier. So you're not on the call having, to jump to it or scroll along with it. That's up to you guys how you want to do that. We'll have to have that conversation in the references work group as to whether or not it has to be fully documented and show the text or not. But so a couple things to note about IPR. There's been a lot of discussion about IPR in the past 2 years. NENA headquarters is supposed to draft up some kind of short little kind of FAQ or informational thing about it. I think it's fallen off of Brandon's list. But a couple things that I did here is I pulled out from the front of every NENA document under development is this particular statement. And you need to remind people that, hey, what we're creating is for the use of the people on this work group to get to the end, because we may change what's in here and we don't want this stuff showing up in RFPs and stuff when it's not final. I've gotten asked before by people, well, can I share this with someone in my organization? And the answer is yes, as long as they don't share it outside your organization. You're representing your organization. You may need to talk to those people and get their input on something. So it's fine to talk with them and share that information with them. This particular quote that I put in here came from NENA Council when I had an issue pop up in one of my work groups that we weren't sure how to deal with, because we thought we had addressed an issue during the call. And then right after the call, we got another email from somebody that was questioning something about it. And, the thing that you hear a lot of people say is, well, you're not allowed to mention a company, organization, or product. And what the council said is that basically, try not to, but there are going to be situations that you really need to say what it is. So as long as you're doing it within reasonable understandings, you're not saying it's better than another, or that, we need to make sure that the standard can accommodate this particular product. If it's just something in the process does not prevent any other entity or organization or make it unfair for them, then it's okay to do that. But, when possible, you should try to not be specific. You can be more general about, GIS, for me, it's all GIS stuff. If GIS producers of software are able to do this particular thing, then we definitely want to make sure that we note in our standards that we can do this. If they're not able to do it, we need to word this in such a way that they can work towards being able to do this, but maybe not necessarily require them. So there needs to be some flexibility to say somebody specifically, but whenever possible, keep it generic. And people are going to glaze over with their eyes when you mention IPR, because most of us don't really understand it that much anyways. So when you kind of go through some logistical stuff, you're going to start, your meeting off by, welcoming them and telling them who you are. And then you want to give them a high level overview of why you're here. Now for you guys, you need to talk about the history of the document and what you're starting with and how it got to where it was, and where to go forward. And then from there, that's again, high level, not get into the technical, but just explain why. Then you'll want to go over all your logistical stuff. So you want to review your logistics. You want to talk about how you're going to handle roll call and some basic etiquette reminders. You'll also want to point out to them that NENA has this whole document about everything that you're doing. And if they have questions about it, they're encouraged to go ahead and review pieces of that. But that is what you as work group leaders are trying to follow and meet the requirements in that document. And then stress to them again, if you cannot be on a call, you needed to notify the leadership, not email blast everybody, but email your leadership. And then you can talk briefly about how you're going to plan to handle you're not showing up. We may email you and remind you. We may ask you if you'd prefer to be an authorized observer at that point in time. That's up to you guys to decide how you want to go forward with that. Okay, so another thing that is handled different ways in different groups is at the back of a document, there is a list of who contributed to the document. Some work group leaders list anyone who signed up as a work group member, regardless if they ever said anything. Other work groups I've heard, they require you to submit text or be very vocal in the discussions and help through the contributions. That's something that you guys need to talk about ahead of time with the group on how you want to handle it. So if you set the expectation early that you really need to be talking during the calls, you need to be dropping in suggestions in text in the chat box or emailing us text contribution. That's the type of stuff that helps us check the box to say, yes, you did contribute to it. But that's up to how you guys want to handle it. There's no rule as far as how that's happened. On the GIS data model document, we kind of did up until we got, I think, to our public review. Once we finished all committee review, we were at the point we said anyone coming on after that, they really weren't involved in the core stuff unless they made a big contribution. And we actually had a person who submitted a whole bunch of comments that we ended up going back in the document, and we fine-tuned many pieces of our document. And as co-chairs, we said they contribute a lot of text to fixing it. So we made them listed in the back of the documents. That's other things to think about too when you're going through the process of getting to have to fill out that particular table at the end. You want to, remind them how you want them to submit stuff. Now, you guys might be a small enough group that everyone can talk, but I found that using the chat box is very helpful for the more shy people on the group or those who are new to NENA work groups to kind of, give a contribution, but not feel like they're going to get it stepped all over either. And another thing to remind folks is this last item about cross working group issues. Sometimes people are on different work groups and they may have knowledge of something that's happening in another work group that there could be something that's going to impact what you're working on, or there's a conflict that you've heard between the two as far as what they're going to give out different information for the same thing. And you need to bring that up so that those co-chairs can get together and try to resolve it. And as work group members, they should help bring that forward and help facilitate those discussions whenever possible. Okay, then what you expect of them as well, that they're respectful to each other in their conversations, both verbally and written. They come prepared to the meeting. So they've looked at the agenda, they've read the meeting notes if they weren't there at the last meeting, and the updated document, that they're participating verbally or in writing. If they're the person who's voting on behalf of their organization, they're required to vote in any official ballots. And then to help you guys out as co-chairs is tell them, there's 3 of us because there's a lot of work we do, but we can't always all be here in the same meeting. So to help us out, if we can't be here, we need you guys to help us. Either, somebody volunteers to take notes or help monitor at least the chat box so that we don't fall behind, that we're not trying to spread ourselves too thin. And then the stuff that we ask NENA to do for us is if we have new NENA Workspace members that come on board, Delane has to set up those accounts because she has to assign them to a particular organization because it impacts the voting rolls. Once she has their account set up, you as co-chair should be adding them to your work group. Delane's got a lot on her plate. She shouldn't have to be the ones to add it. And it's very simple for you guys to go in and actually add the work group members. The work group members during their course of being on your work group may change who they're employed by, and they can go in and keep their own information up to date with the exception of that organization. And so you will need to have them make sure that they go contact Elaine and she will update their organization. Now that you as co-chairs may impact the voting rolls if they were coming in where you already had another representative for that same organization, or vice versa. They might be the primary voter and there's 2 people for an employer. They leave that employer, they're no longer the primary voter. You have to make sure that you change that other person to be the primary voter and make sure they understand that they now have taken on that responsibility. They're also a resource at NENA for, we're basically talking about Delane, but also the references working group and document management working groups can provide guidance too on how to develop documents, what the administrative procedures are, how do you go through an all committee review and public review, what's the process, what are the dots I have to check in the form and fill out. And then the other important thing that they do is they have control over the Zoom accounts. And each committee is given one account, and that same account is shared by multiple work groups. And I believe you can have 2 work group leaders logged in at the same time. So let's say your call's at 1 o'clock, and within that same committee, there's another call at 2 o'clock. That allows each of those groups to be able to log in. So typically you don't wait to right at the top of the hour, you log in 15 minutes beforehand. So you might be not finishing your call to 2 o'clock, but they need to get on at 1:45. That's fine. It's when you have 3 work groups that are overlapping in some perspective that you may have trouble. But if you've planned out when your calls are ahead of time, you shouldn't run into that. The one thing we've had a problem with, and you may have been on calls where this has occurred, is Zoom implemented new 2-factor authentication. And so if you log in as the person who's going to run the Zoom call, and you haven't logged in a while, you may find that they're requesting you to validate that you're entitled to log into that, and they want you to put in a 6-digit code. Well, that 6-digit code goes to one email address right now, and that's Delane. And if she's not knowing that you need that code, or she's in a meeting, or she's not available, you won't get that code and you won't be able to log in. So what's going to be happening is they are setting up an email distribution list that whenever those codes come out, they will be blasted to all the work group co-chairs, which means you're going to get a couple times a week people who got locked out of the Zoom account. And as long as it's not your committee, you don't have to worry about it. If you're not in there, just delete those emails. It's nothing that you have to worry about. But if you're the one person who gets locked out and you're panicking before a meeting, at least you're going to get the code to you and you'll be able to get in. The other time that it becomes important to have that code is if you are taking notes and you need to grab the Zoom attendance, you have to log in on your desktop into the administrative account and go in there and pull the Zoom attendance down. And so if you change computers, or if you travel and you take your computer with you, but you're coming from a new IP, it's going to recognize that and it's going to push out that request to enter a 6-digit code. I have, knock on wood, yet to see one of those blast emails yet. So I'm just thinking it hasn't been set up yet. But you guys will need to decide if all of you should be on that distribution list, or you only want 1 or 2 to be on it. It's up to you guys. Any questions about that?
Nope, that's pretty good. There will be some sort of that all that login information will come at a different time, right?
Yes. Actually, Sandy and Pete have that already. They can share that with you at any time.
I just know I was told be real careful to make sure you log in and out so you don't start your Zoom for work. You got to pay attention to that part. So I think that's where I'm a little nervous and I want to practice.
Yeah, and the other thing too is it probably eats up one of the licenses. So if you have a lot of work groups under a particular committee, and if you're logged in elsewhere, it might impact the other licenses, but I'm not sure if that is true or not. I don't know if it's if you participate as that person, it matters versus actually running the call.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that there's one set of credentials issued to the PSAP Operations Committee, and so we can't have overlapping calls using that same login. But other than that, I think you're okay. It's just
Your
calendar
name
wise,
just
you can't
shows up
do them at the
as,
same time.
okay, so it's a calendar, it doesn't impact the actual login then to as a participant on some other call that's not within that committee, right?
Yeah, we just can't have 2 different work groups starting or trying to use the same credentials at the same time.
Okay. Okay.
I was
So-
gonna see if everybody wanted to take a short break. We've been doing this about an hour and 15 minutes. Or if you guys wanted to keep going.
I would love a 5-minute quick break.
Sure.
Okay. And then I'm going to stop recording. I forgot I was recording since Cheryl's presenting and I've been working. And so I'm concerned the recording captured all of my work. And so I'm going to ask April to delete the recording. But Cheryl and I have talked about doing a more formal recording of the work of the co-chair training. And we'll just try to schedule that sooner than later. And I do apologize. I just forgot because I wasn't the one presenting.
Sandy, I think the recording will be fine. It should have just captured
It should be
Cheryl's
just
stuff.
my screen.
I hope
think.
so.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to have April check. But okay, well, I'll keep it recording, but oops. If it's just in case we have to delete. Okay, so do we want to get started at 20 after, or would you like 25 after?
It's up to you guys.
I'm good with 20 after. Just
Yeah, 20 after is fine.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. See you in a bit.
Talk to you shortly. I'm ready whenever you guys are.
I'm all set.
Yep.
All right. The next thing that you'll want to cover in your first working group meeting is talk about the document development process and timeline. You can just let them know that this is all detailed in, oh, I see I got a wrong number here, NENA ADM 001. See, that's on slide 24. Got to fix that. And that, you know, basically the details are in there, but you want to let them know that, you know, everything is being done by consensus. And that's not that everything has to be detailed down to 100% have to agree. It's a consensus. And when you get to the point of moving a document forward and you're doing a vote or a ballot, it's very important that people remember that they're required to vote in that if they're the representative from their organization. And at least half the people have to vote. But you really want as many as possible to vote. And you get consensus when of those who vote, you have at least 2/3 are agreeing that that's the way to move forward. If in your comment process, people are objecting to things, or even in the balloting process, if people are disagreeing about something, the goal is anybody who has an objection or something they want to discuss is it's discussed, it's debated. It doesn't have to be debated ad nauseum. It just has to be thoughtfully considered and make sure everyone feels that we've really talked about this enough and discussed it, and then try to resolve that issue or objection. If you really get something that's 50-50 and it doesn't seem like you're able to resolve it, you know, the chat box is not formal, it's informal. So you need to do an official ballot to try to get past something and be able to move forward on the document. The other thing you'll want to lay out to them is that there are specific steps that you have to go through in order to get to the end. There's the drafting of a document, or in your case, it's going to be the updating of the document. When that's completed, it'll go out for an all committee review, which is focused just on the NENA development group members. Anyone who's on a NENA work group will have the opportunity to review and comment on that. Those comments will come back, they'll have to be resolved. Then after that process, there's the public review. And the public review is kind of an iterative process. The review goes out, if comments come in and the document is modified and the modifications are considered substantive, meaning they changed kind of like the terms and conditions, so to speak, then it has to go out for another review. But those subsequent reviews are restricted to just the text that was changed. So the document editor will have to highlight in yellow specifically what was changed in there and show a tracked change version of what it was to what it went to. Once you get past the public reviews, all the comments are adjudicated, then the voting members of the work group have the official work group ballot. And it's an approval ballot to say, hey, we've finished all our work. We feel that we've successfully adjudicated all the comments. We think this is ready for publication. And so that will then get reviewed by the DSC, and if approved, then enters in what we call a 30-day IPR stable form notice. Once it passes that, there's like a 10-day process review committee to make sure that all the I's were dotted, T's were crossed, you followed the ANSI procedures. And then from there, it would be sent to the NENA Board of Directors for them to approve for it to be published, and then the document would be published. Now, if you guys are lucky, we are in the process of updating ADM 001, where we're removing some of these things. One of the first things is right now, you may know that after each step, there's kind of like an approval ballot from the work group to move forward, which is a 10-day thing. That's being taken out, where only the authoring work group approve a ballot would be the only thing that needs to be officially approved. There is not an all committee review that's going to be required anymore, but there will be like an authoring committee review. The work group that created the document, they will have kind of a last chance to say, hey, before we send this out for public review, do we have any comments, things we need to address? And the group will need to take a hard look at that and make sure those things are fixed in there. And then the IPR stable form notice and the process review committee steps are no longer going to be separate steps. Delaine's kind of doing all a checklist right now of what the IPR excuse me, what the process review committee does. So that's going to disappear. But they're talking about putting the IPR stable form notice to occur at the time the document goes out for public review, kind of running in parallel, so that if there are any issues, they're brought forward in the process sooner rather than later. So keep your fingers crossed that you might be able to skip a couple of these things in the future, be a little bit more efficient. I think I talked about some of these already, about the substantive edits, about the subsequent reviews, but the comment resolution process does have steps as a work group co-chair you have to be aware of. So when a review period ends and the comments come in, the work group has to consider every single comment that comes in. And then each comment requires a response from the work group, asking the commenter to accept or reject it. The one thing you need to know, and when you get to the part about doing comments, there's text and stuff that we can give you that will help you with it, but you need to give them a deadline, because a lot of times people get these things, they say, oh yeah, they did what I asked them, and they don't respond back to you, they just ignore you. Or they, for all you know, they left and wherever they were employed, they're no longer there by the time you get to the comments and send it back. And their email might be saying, hey, this person no longer works here, but you won't receive it because it goes into the NENA workspace and it gets kind of put into a delayed folder or a spam folder or something there. So you have no idea if they didn't receive it. So you need to give a cutoff date, usually like 10 days max, for them to respond back to you and give their approval or rejection of it. If anyone does reject, part of your response to them is if you don't approve, you have to provide a reasoning why or revised text. You have to reconsider whatever information they provide back to you. It doesn't mean you have to change anything, but you have to actually talk about it with the work group and determine the information that they provided, is it enough that we would accept the comment and modify anything. And you can choose not to accept it. You can reject it again and explain why, or they could just reject it and not provide any information. You may also decide with the additional information, yeah, they're kind of right, but it's kind of out of scope. So we want to put this off to a future version. And so you can respond back to them that way. What you don't want to get into is a continuous loop that they continually reject. So if you get a rejection from them, decide not to change the document, and you can send it back to them. At that point, you can say, if you continue to have issues with this, then you need to, I think it's like file something with the DSC as to why, and then there's a whole process to go through. But in most, I don't know, I've never run into that in any of my work groups, but from what I've heard in most cases, that hasn't occurred. Most of the people just after 2 tries kind of give up on it. And then remind them also about their voting requirements, that they've identified who the representative is. You only have 1 vote per organization. And when they do vote, they should check in with their other work group members that are from their same organization to make sure they're all still on the same page and that there's no concerns about what's being approved at that point in time. And then kind of like the next thing that you want to do, for unless you have a group of people who all are good NWS workspace users, you want to go through and then just kind of show them on screen how to do certain things in it, where to go. And that kind of gives them an understanding it's not as scary as it seems, and they can see where things are. And as we continue to update the NENA knowledge base, we'll also give you links to where that same type of information is in there, and you can drop that into your meeting notes and they'll be able to navigate to it. So you primarily want to remind them to keep their contact information up to date, so that if they do change email addresses, that you learn about it and NENA Workspace learns about it, and they're getting the notices for the meetings, they're getting discussion lists, document posting, stuff like that. You want to go over where the documents are stored, how to find a document, where to put text contributions, and where they can even go into the ballots. Now in the SBP, I actually did a presentation on where that stuff is. So that's this particular presentation. Do you guys want me to go through this on how to navigate this whole system?
I sat through that, and that was my first dive. So Gary, how do you feel?
Refresher, I've been workspace user, but not for almost 6 years now, due to my board responsibilities. So I'd be happy to see a refresh.
Yeah, I'm right with you, Gary. I feel like I learn something every time I watch somebody else navigate it. So
So I'll kind of step through it, and you can tell me to slow up or speed, or slow down or speed up, depending on how I'm going. So we already kind of looked at the fact that there's an events calendar homepage. How do you log into NENA Workspace? And so what you want to do is point out to them that in the upper right, there's a little sign in. That's where you actually go to sign in. You type in your email and you've been given a password. I recommend people actually check that box about staying signed in so that you don't have to log in each time during that day. There are organizations that wipe everything on your history clean each night. So it's only really good for that day, but at least you don't have to keep logging in each time you have a document that you need to do. Once you actually get logged in, how do you find where your working group page is? This is the home page where it has every meeting within the NENA Workspace recorded, but you go to communities, and from there you do the drop down and you select my communities so that you get rid of the 8 pages of communities that you would see and just see the ones that you're in there. And then you want to scroll through the list and select the workgroup name that you might have in there. It actually brings up your workgroup page when you click on it. And then what I recommend people do is bookmark this page, because you're going to then have it on your desktop or someplace you can just click on it, not have to worry about logging in. It brings you right to it. Okay, so in here, you want to remind people that this is where they can go in really quickly to send the 3 of you an email if they're not going to be available for a meeting, or if they need to contact you directly about something else on the document. The other thing that you want to point out on here is that the most recent email information that's going on for the work group can always be found on the front page. So if they're looking for something quick that they saw just very recently, they can go here and not have to wade through discussion lists or stuff like that. And the other thing is co-chairs I recommend you use is this announcements section. So if you have important announcements like there's a ballot out or the work group isn't going to be meeting for 2 or 3 weeks during a holiday season, you can place that information here. I also use it to post as a reminder how we want people to post contributions into the NENA Workspace and what the file naming convention should be, so that if you go into the contributions folder, you will understand what's in there. And usually that's something like a date followed by their name, followed by a brief summary of what that information is or the section in the document that it's referencing. So if you want to actually email an entire work group, you can, about a particular topic, you would do that using this discussion tab that's shown here. And you would actually go over to the post, the green post, the new message, and it will open up a discussion email. And in there, you're going to end up filling in your subject line. You want to add your message. And if you need to, there's a spot here to add attachments. So if you have a document that maybe has some images that you want to present to folks as, hey, there's a graphic that we can drop into the document, you can do that. And then hit post and it'll send it out to everyone automatically. Now, if there's just one person that you want to email, there's a couple ways to do that. One of them is if they've provided their email address, you can just hover over their email address and click on it, and it will automatically open an email from within their system. You would hit the send message. And then the other way to do it is you can just hit the send message over here and it will do that as well. So another thing to do in the past, you were able to generate an iCalendar file that you could then email to people. I've found it's been easier to just tell people go directly to the events tab and download the meeting series from there. And it should automatically go into whatever their system uses. And so to do that, you navigate to the events. All of the upcoming events are automatically listed, but what you want to do is just click on the overlapping calendar that's next to the meeting series. That will pull up a list of all the events in the series. So if you scheduled, 6 months worth of events and they've already had 4 months of them, they're still all going to be there. But then what you want to do is go to the very first meeting, because that starts the meeting series, and click on that. And it will bring you to where that meeting was originally established here. And you want to download to the calendar. That's the only way that you can download the entire meeting series from NENA Workspace. If you go to an individual meeting, it will only download that individual meeting. And if you've got 20 of them scheduled, you don't want to have to do this 20 times. So this is the easiest way to find and download everything to your calendar. Any questions about the calendar?
So even if someone is like comes later to the group, still tell them to go to whatever that top one is. to download.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And it'll put it on their calendar back to, January 1st, if that's when the first meeting was, but it doesn't matter. Those have already occurred.
And then where's the add the, oh, I see, download your calendar. Got it.
Yep. Right over here.
Right on the box. Okay.
Yep.
And then so sometimes in work groups, they've changed it or it's been really long. The first meeting has been changed because something changed, right? So you may not
Correct.
see everything. Okay, got it.
So, and what you'll notice if you actually start going back to those old meetings, let's say for whatever reason the login information was changed, the old login information is with the meeting as it was for that date. Anything that was changed shows up on that new date. So you don't really want to go back and copy paste from an old meeting into a new one. But if you do the download the series, the upcoming meetings should have all the correct information in it.
Okay.
And I recommend when you set up meetings not to do more than 6 months in case something does change. Or for example, like the recent issue with setting up the meetings, we found that people who have meetings that were created early in their year, they're not getting those email notifications, even though Higher Logic allegedly has fixed stuff. Again, that's theoretical. We think people have set up newer meetings since then, they're getting those notifications. So if you have something set up for 2 years, and something in Higher Logic changes or breaks and then they have to reissue it, you may have the same issue happen. The other thing you want to do is teach them how to navigate the where all the documents are being stored. So the workspace tab, for those of you who remember Covey or Cavi or whatever they called it, it was pulled over from there. But you would click on workspace, then you would go to documents, and to find where something is there's that little folder navigator, and you would click on it to expand and you get to see all the different folders that are under there. And these are pretty much standard set up by Delane. So, you'll have agendas and notes. Your issues received is where your ISF and your charter should be stored. You want to point out to them that, this contributions, that's where they're going to place their contributions and text and updates to it. We don't want them posting things in the draft workgroup documents folder. That's where the co-chairs post the official versions of the document that are created each week. You want to focus on the contributions for the workgroup members. And once you click on it, it gives you all of the various folders that are there. And if they then need, files that are there, but if they want to upload their contribution, they do it by clicking on that little green add button. And when that is done, it opens up a new page, and that's where they add in all the information. Now, I have this little note here about the display title and download name. These things up here, they're going to auto-populate when this file is loaded. I've seen people who've gone in and they put the name of something, and what ends up being a problem is they don't put the extension in. So they don't put in that it's a docx, or they don't put in it's a .xlxx. And what happens is that information they put in overwrites the information attached to the file. And when people go to download it, their system goes, I don't have a clue what kind of file this is, because whatever they ended up putting in display title and document number overwrote everything. And so what I tell folks is just use this button, ignore those 3 that are up there. And there's one more group I've told them multiple times and they still don't populate it the right way. Once you do the add file, you will see the name of the file that you actually populated in there, and that's how it'll be stored in your NENA workspace. Yep, if they do want to put that thing in there, that's when we say that you have to put the document exclusion, or excuse me, extension in there. Then continuing down below that, you have to put in a brief description. If it's going to be a document version that they're going to make updates to, maybe it's a contribution, but they're going to work on it in a subgroup over the next couple weeks, it should be very brief and short. This doesn't even have to be filled out, but if they are going to put something in there, we recommend that it just be a generic version so that you can do revisions to it. From there, you want to identify who's the person who is submitting the text, who's the technical author for it. And if you're an ANSI candidate project, you have to select the project that's here. And most importantly, hit the add button. If you don't hit add, it doesn't get entered and it never gets put in there. And this project button is how Delane is using a projects template elsewhere in the system to track where ANSI documents are going through the process. And then scrolling down a little bit more, this area at the very bottom is the email message that will be given to the people who are going to receive the document on your work group. So you would just fill it in as if it was a regular email. And a lot of people just don't even fill this part out, but I always find it's worthwhile doing a very brief 1-sentence summary of exactly what it is. Meeting notes from the July 28th, 2002 workgroup call, or if it's contribution, proposed text as discussed about caller ID on the July 15th workgroup meeting. Something very short, so when it comes in, people see it pop up in their email, they know right away, is this something I need to look at? Otherwise, they're just seeing the file name, which may or may not be adequate enough. And then when you're all done, hit add document and it will automatically email everything out to it. So any questions about the document stuff before I move on? Okay, so a question that's going to come up when you get closer to balloting, or if somebody's coming or going from work groups, is how do I know if I'm a voting member of the work group? And so if you show this to people at the beginning, they hopefully will remember, they can find this out for themselves, that there are 3 primary roles that show up, whether or not they're the primary voter for the organization, an alternate voter, or someone who's not a voter at all, a non-voter. And they go again to Workspace, to the roster tab, and then they can go ahead and look under voting and they can find their role there. And then when you are also getting to the session where you're going to get comments that come in and somebody wants to go in and take a look at what those comments were, anybody can go and look at the comments that were submitted at any time once they're out there, if they're on the work group. And also they can see the responses that are uploaded by the co-chairs. And to do that, you can show them that you can either do it directly from the document details page. So if you've got a document posted, you can pull it from there, or you can do it through the Workspace comments page. In which case, Workspace, you click on comments, you can see them there, and then you can click on the headings to sort them, and you can also do a filter on the state of them. So you want to look for all the new comments, you could filter by the word new. And the states. Now, if they also want to see what about ballots, how do I see what the status of the ballot is? You'll be sending out probably automated versions that will give people an update on where things are. But at any point during the ballot period, they can go into Workspace, look under ballots, and they can click on view to actually get in there. And there's all kinds of details that are in there. They can actually see the whole ballot instructions that were originally in there. They can also go in and see where the numbers are as far as how many people have voted already, and how many have yes, no, or have abstained from voting. And I actually think it's useful, especially to the co-chairs. You can go down and there's all kinds of statistics that are down here that are interesting to look at. You can do the summary, the basic yes, no, and abstain. There is one about the details, so you can see individually by user who voted and how they voted. And then as co-chairs, I recommend starting to use this if you have activities that people raise their hand and say, hey, I'm going to do this. There's an option in here to actually assign action items to people and give them a due date. And so that you can set them up so they get reminders on a certain thing, but this is also on your agenda and notes form, the very first agenda item, that if there are open action items, you can check on them. And pretty much it's very basic to put in, but if somebody wants to figure out which ones are currently open, particularly you guys as co-chairs, you go into any status and you can select the ones that are still open and then see them. And then it will open it up and you can see what that actual assigned item is. You can see when it was open, the date it was closed, or when it's due. And then you have the ability to give them 3 reminders during that process. A lot of times you may end up needing to extend a timeline. So in that case, I wouldn't necessarily fill out all 3 reminder notifications. So maybe they say, oh, I'm going to have it done for the next meeting. And you meet on Thursday, you might want to send out a reminder email to them on Tuesday morning, but leave the other 2 open, because what I've seen happen a lot of times is you have to change the end date of when it's due. And once you use up those 3 auto email reminders, you can't add a 4th one in or overdo the ones that were there. You'd actually have to delete the item and then open a new one if you wanted to do that. And then again, it has a detailed description that's there. And that's my walkthrough of NENA Workspace as far as a canned item. Any questions about NENA Workspace?
Well, Cheryl, thanks for that overview again.
Yep. Okay, so now I got to go into a different PowerPoint, because while I went through the one, I have not gone back to this old presentation from 5 years ago and moved things over. So at this point, I'm kind of winging it. So you guys are going to have to really understand that this content has not been updated and it might be different at this point. So just kind of key points that are in here is, okay, now you've had your first work group meeting. Oh, I know I went out to show you guys too. So that you said all this stuff that we were supposed to go over. What I've created that I will send you guys, I actually sent this to another group this morning too, is I have a Word document that is your agenda notes template. And if you look at it, let me put it on multiple page. It's the same items that you would see in the normal template. I've added in your first work group meeting, but from new business down, all the stuff that I talked about, I've already put it in your meeting notes and then highlighted in yellow where you'll need to go in and kind of customize it for your work group. So it has, reminders about the introduction of you guys. You want to put in a background of why your work group was spun up, and your time frame goals. Then talk about your meeting logistics and your participation. And note all this information that's already filled in here for your meeting notes. So a summary of everything that I just went over, the call process, etiquette reminders, expectations, participation and document contributions, what you expected of them, what we expect of NENA, what consensus means, and use of the chat box. There's a section then about balloting, and information is in there. Then there's also the orientation that I just did, how to get to some of these things are in here. All of this is documented. Important reading and references documents I put in here. So there's an initial welcome email that goes out, and we tell them to download certain things, to review the ethics and code of conducts, those type of things that are in here. And then also talking about those NENA development stages and what they mean. And then the last item is what your work plan is for creating or updating. And this will be more flexible on how you guys want to do it and any agenda items after it. So this is going to be a document I'm going to have the references work group review. I'll send it to you guys now so you can start planning your first meeting. But what this does is it prevents you having to type in kind of standard stuff. And then let's say a month into the work group and you've been meeting for a month already, you get 2 new people who join. You can then just send them this meeting notes document as part of their welcome letter and say, hey, to keep up to date on what's been happening. Here's our first meeting notes. It has a lot of the logistical information about how we run our work group in the background you need to know to participate. And now we have a consistent message also that's being put out through all the NENA work groups. So you can use this for the notes, but then also make a copy of it and wipe out everything that's in the white areas. And now you have your agenda. You'll still need to update all this, standard information up here about putting in the correct links and stuff. Use this help that's up here that takes you to instructions on how to fill all this information out and get it as well. So I forgot to mention that. And then I mentioned I would send you guys the roster template. There is that welcome letter that you had seen. So that as well as here, I'll send that to you guys so you have it. And what is the other thing? We haven't gone over this yet, but it would be under managing the membership. But I have a standard letter. I typically use that if you've got somebody who hasn't been showing up to meetings and you think it might be time to remove their privileges of voting, changing them to an authorized observer. So we have some kind of standard wording. And then there's a second one that, let's say you have an authorized observer who they attended your first 2 meetings, you never saw them again, you changed them to an authorized observer. You're a year into it, you still have not seen hide nor hair of them. They've never participated in discussions or ever provided a contributions. If you feel you're at the point that why are we even carrying them as an authorized observer and you want to remove them, this could be a way that you could do it. Typically though, if you're on a work group that has a document, you just kind of let them hang out there and then you just cut off their membership when the work group closes because everything's archived off. But those are a couple documents I have done that I will share with you guys in advance of the work group approving them. Because Pete would give them to you anyways, right, Pete?
Okay, you caught me. What did I do?
There's a history there.
No, I was just saying that these I have draft documents. The references working group hasn't reviewed them yet. You guys know they're draft. Use them as however you want, so we're not reinventing the wheel. And
Oh,
if I
sure.
had, you would have just given them to them anyways, even without them being fully approved. So I don't care.
Well, if they'd have asked, I certainly would have.
Okay, so working group meetings. All right, you've had your first meeting. Now you're going to prepare for your next meeting. So one of the key things as work groups is you're going to need to figure out what your schedule is going to be to prepare for your next call. And then also how you're going to manage your document distribution. So like the one thing that I mentioned before is, should your agendas be also created by the person who does the meeting notes? That's a decision you need to make. So kind of going through the process, preparing for your call, what you want to do is, if one of you can't be there, don't throw up the flag and say, well, we can't have a meeting. Typically, if there's 2 of you, there's usually enough knowledge base after a couple meetings that you could probably continue on through. And just ask your work group members to step up and help you guys out a little bit by monitoring the chat box or counting if you've got a whole bunch of people and you need somebody to count the number of votes in the chat box, or even taking brief notes for them. You should meet prior to the call to plan, review the agenda, review the content, know what you're going to do. Now, on a lot of the work groups that I've been on recently, we typically, after a work group call ends, the co-chairs stay on the call and we go over what happened. The person who took notes, they kind of have draft notes. They ask the other co-chairs to help them fill in some information. And they may then take that later and fine tune it and get back to them. But anything that they were unsure of or unclear about, they can work with the other co-chairs right while it's still fresh in everyone's mind and wrap that up. The other thing that we also do is, typically the person who has to start the call gets on 15 minutes ahead. If you do meet afterwards and you've had something important come up during the week, or there's been contributions that are there, you might want to put a hold on your calendar to meet the hour before or half an hour before. I will warn you, if you set it up that you're using the same Zoom session that the work group is on, you're going to have people Zoom bomb you as much as 30 minutes before the call, and they join the call. So you're going to want to set up a separate session in order to be able to do that if you want to get on and do that. And Sandy, I think in our one call, we were getting up, I think an hour before on some weeks. And other weeks we were like, we don't need that much time. We had the hour before reserved, but we say next week we only really need to get on for 30 minutes, or maybe you don't need to at all. Hey, let's just get on 15 minutes before. So you guys will find a schedule that works best for you. The key thing about doing that, it's not just being prepared, but you want to make sure you have the same message that's coming from all of you and you don't accidentally start contradicting, because then it will cause loss of confidence in your activities as work group co-chairs, that they're like, well, geez, the leaders can't even get this straight. They're all saying different things, and that can be a problem, as far as keeping people engaged. As far as document posting, my recommendation is try to get the draft document and notes out within a couple days if you can, and not wait too long, especially if you guys are meeting on Thursdays. You really want to try to get it done before the weekend, because by the time Monday rolls around, you're not going to remember what was on Thursday. It's really hard to do that. And as far as an agenda, you want to try to get it out there at least 24 hours before a call, preferably sooner. Typically, if you've met after the call, you filled in the holes on the notes. Once the notes are done, the note taker or whoever's going to prepare the agenda just takes the notes and strip out what was covered, pushes things into unfinished business if there was something you were stuck in the middle of, tacks on a few new things, and then they can post that right away too. There's typically no reason to not post it as soon as it's ready, because if you need to add something to it later, you can either add it as a revision or during the beginning of the call when you talk about, are there any additions to the agenda? You guys can always add on. The co-chairs would like to add this onto the agenda. And then again, draft documents, draft notes, even if they're not ready for the others to review, it's good for those to be shared amongst all the co-chairs, so that if something happens to somebody, unfortunately, and they're not going to be available, you all have the copy of what was last done, and B, it also helps to refresh your memory if you're trying to clean up the documents or the notes. When you post your draft documents, so you have your style document, you don't post it as an individual entry, you post it as revision to the previous ones. And that is so that you don't have a really long list of things to find in there. I also recommend coming up with a standardized way of naming your document if you're one of these people like me who likes to keep everything locally as well. So you have a copy of it, start it, or at least have the same name, but somewhere have the date where it's a year, month, day. Then when you go to sort it, it will always sort in chronological order that you can find where it is faster than if you just renamed it multiple ways. Pete will probably remember Mike doing different master glossary names for a while. It was impossible to find what our last one was. And as far as the next meeting document, whatever your most recently posted version is, once you've posted it, make a copy of it and just rename it with the new date. Oops, sorry, I want to go back. This, don't pay attention to this. In a NENA workspace document that you're keeping track of, especially ANSI, you need to always show your tracked changes. This was put in here, I think, because back at the time when we were trying to resolve some stuff in a document, we were doing that, but that's going to come out of this. And it's very helpful to, when you get to the point where you're actually reviewing comments, is to create a comment in your document and copy that comment information in there. So when the work group is actually reviewing the material, you're having everything within the document. You're seeing what the original commenter stated, what they proposed, and then you have the track changes you may incorporate based on their recommendation or different changes that you come up with. And then you can also record in that comment the date the work group discussed it and what their decision was. They accepted that change by consensus, or whatever you need to do to kind of summarize what happened there. As far as how to go through the whole document, the executive summary is a good place to start, but not as finalized text. It's more of getting general consensus on what that document needs to cover. Now, you guys already have a document, you already have text, so this isn't really going to be as big of a deal for you guys. You probably also have an outline of what's in there. But what you'll want to do before your first meeting as co-chairs is, when you look at the charter, has everything been accomplished in the charter, or are there additional things that came up maybe in comments from a previous thing that requires the addition of a new section, new text? So you might need to go in and preload the document with some placeholders for where you think additional content needs to be added, or you may want to add a comment on, this wasn't covered in our last set of comments, we still need to adjudicate this issue that came up. So you can kind of plan ahead and prepare for that. But you'll need to do that as co-chairs, as a group, so that you can develop a strategy for moving forward. If you end up in your document needing any type of graphics or tables, get someone on your work group to do that. Don't be the ones volunteering to do that work. That's their contribution to it, and you have more than enough to do leading a call and coming up with agendas and notes afterwards. And just some of the stuff that we talked about before was making sure that if you have a big group, that they're engaged, they can't talk over each other, so they can use the chat box. And that's especially good for folks who are kind of quiet and kind of afraid to speak over the louder voices on the call. Some of this stuff is probably kind of standard. When you're going through your document, you might need to go through the whole thing from front to beginning just to kind of validate everything. You guys are going to have to figure out what works best for you. You don't really want to be reading everything on the call together if you don't have to. So maybe if it's something that with your group, you already know that we really don't think we have anything in here, tell the work group, okay, we need you guys to review section 3.5 through 3.8 prior to the next work group call. And if you see anything in it you think we discussed, you need to let us know, because otherwise on the beginning of the next call, we're just gonna say, unless anyone objects, we're gonna consider that these sections don't need any updates. And that way you can move through the document faster. If you try to read everything, and I don't know how long your document is, you could be there forever. But you need to put some onus on the people to actually read through the document and get up to speed on each of those sections. And then any change you make to the document, make sure track changes is on so that you can see where text is removed or text was added. And I mentioned comments for tracking when you get public review or all community review comments, but you might also want to use it to show, grab a whole section, highlight it, and say that text changes were all approved by the working group on such and such date. You can also use comments to be placeholders on where you've assigned someone to provide additional text or to do research on something so you don't lose track of it. But that's the type of stuff that should probably also be captured as maybe an action item. The other thing too is you may get to the end of going through the whole document, and as you're going back through, did every comment get taken care of? That's a way to find, oh, we forgot about something. So you can, if you run into something, we've also used them as a parking lot, that something came up during this section that we discussed it. We're not sure if it's really in scope or belongs in here, but we'll record it as a comment. When we get to the end, we'll come back and make a decision. Should we still continue forward and look at this again, or can we just drop it? Already talked about balloting, about using that for major issues that you can't resolve on the call. And then just when you get to the very end, make sure anything you did comment on was addressed. And that's kind of it about weekly calls. Anything you guys want to go over? Maybe I didn't mention. Or questions about?
I think it's a lot to process. So right now I'm good. Gary, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's covered well. I'm not sure without seeing the document that we're going to be finalizing here, reviewing again, how to engage some of the participants. So in my past life, I've been assigned on work groups with a couple other members to accomplish a task and bring that back to the group and provide that documentation. So I'm thinking we could probably do the same here to engage those that are not vocal or not chatty. And I appreciate you saying if there's a Visio, have somebody in your work group do it.
Absolutely. Yep. And use subgroups whenever you could. Now, not understanding or knowing how your document's set up, but if there are very specific sections that you have SMEs that would be able to read and give a feedback to the work group, you might want to break up the group and say, okay, we need you guys to pick one of these 3 subgroups. And instead of having a call next week, we'll meet in 2 weeks, but in the next 2 weeks, we need each subgroup to review these sections and then assign, 3 separate subgroups sections and let each of the people volunteer to be on them. And that week that you're not meeting, they can get together either on a call or they can do it through email, however they want to do it. And they can kind of do some of that review for you ahead of time if you think that makes sense. Think out of the box. There's no required way to do it, but if you can find a way that will help your work proceed without you guys getting stuck doing a lot of the heavy lifting and engage the people to take ownership early, that will help you in the long run.
Yeah, great, Cheryl. Yeah, I think part of my intention, Leanne, and I'm certain part of yours is identifying future work group leaders from this effort that we're doing here, and giving that opportunity to those folks.
And subgroups are a great way to find out who steps up and says, okay, when you have your subgroups, let's say you set up 3, who's going to take responsibility for leading it and making sure the conversations are occurring. And we did that in our stewardship work group. And one of those people who really stepped up to the plate, she's now going to chair a work group starting next week. And she's, starting at the notes level, but it was clear that she was going to be a good leader and we were able to tap her.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Anything else about weekly calls before we talk about membership and onboarding and deboarding?
Nope. I mean, this has just been really good. So I appreciate, it's been long, but it's really good information.
Yeah, we did this session at SBP and I think it was like a half-day session. It was long. Okay, so membership. So we're going to talk about onboarding new members and what do you do about people who aren't participating. So we'll start with the new members. You as co-chairs are able to go in and add people to your roster. And I don't have that in my meeting notes here, but if you wanted to walk through that, I'd be happy to walk through at any point. I know Sandy also knows how to do it. Eventually it will all be in our guide on how to do it with, screen captures and everything like I did for the other SBP session, but I don't have that now. But what you'll want to do is as co-chairs, now that you're officially on there, when someone hits the red button on nena.org that says they want to request to join your work group, all 3 of you will be emailed a notification that says this, I think it's called a site alert email. And the person has requested to join the work group and they filled out the form, and you're going to get a copy of the form. So you're going to need to determine which of you is going to be responsible for when those come in, adding them to the work group. That way you're not all trying to do it. So you're going to have to make that determination. When it comes in, the first thing that I typically do is I go in to the settings to add the member and see if they already have a NENA Workspace account. Because if they don't, you need to forward that site alert to Delane and say, hey, this person's requested to join our work group, but they do not have an NWS account. Can you please set one up? And what she will do is she will set one up. She will sometimes assign them a role, sometimes she won't, but she will then let you know when they have an account. Once they have the account, then you can go in and you can add them, and just as if they were already in the system. And whenever you add somebody in, you have to then change them so that they get daily notices or whatever the option is, to that they get them continuously or as they come out. But then you also have to register them for the work group. And how to do all this is actually documented in our knowledge base now. And I don't know if it's 100% up to speed because I haven't looked at it in a while. But I'm going to show you in a second where you can find it. Of course, now, Mike, as we have more people using it, it's going to get even slower. So if you go into the NENA knowledge base, really slow. I have fiber, so it's the system. So you can either get to it from, the NENA development group guide, or you can just search for things up here. And so this is probably go into here, show you there's this whole thing, which we have to fix this because this is too much crap to find. You'll never find it otherwise. Add a member in NENA Workspace to a working group. So you can see we have information here, talks about logging in, all this information, like here's an old welcome letter that's got to get changed out, but you see how there's no pictures? Well, we're going to add pictures so that it's easier, but right now you can just follow the text and it will tell you what options to select that are in here. So it is in the guide on how to do it, but once you put somebody in, you have to register them for the calls so that A, they get that notification 24 hours before the call that the meeting's coming up, and B, they get the reminder to record your attendance email an hour before. So that some of that information is in the guide. It's just not as easy to navigate as some of the other stuff.
So that one, I'm following along. So the how to add member, that is both adding them and registering them.
I believe it's got the registration in there too. I think it's at the bottom of it.
I think you have to go into manage roster.
Is it manage roster?
Yeah.
That's the.
So maybe when we get the first few, we can Zoom with one of you to make sure that we've got
Yes.
it down. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and to do that, what I would do is you would be the one doing it and you would share your screen so that doing it is half the battle. Once you've done it
Yes.
a couple times, makes
I
it really easy to do. When you get a new member, whether it's before or in the middle of, you've already met for a couple weeks, you want to add them to your attendance tracking spreadsheet, download an updated version of the contacts so that you always keep that up to date, and send them that standard introductory email that you have that you use initially. And then you'll want to, that first meeting, you can attach that on there, but in that introductory email, again, I have that form I'll be sending you. It tells them when, where to go to download the calendar series. It has the brief summary of their expectations. It has links to all the draft documents and other things that they should try to review before they join the first item. And in this link, of course, is in there, but it's an older letter. After the call, again, I'll send you guys the newer version. And then the other thing you want to do, a lot of folks I've seen, they don't do this till just before a vote. And I think it's easier on you if you just kind of do it as things go along, because then when you have to do it, you already know how to do it, or you know that there's not an issue. But you want to resolve any voting rules. People come and go through organizations all the time. And so you want to make sure you know, if you have more than one person from the same organization, you've already had them work it out even before the work group starts, who's going to be the primary voter and who's going to be the alternate voter. Okay, what do you do if somebody hasn't been participating? So we have this statement that, you know, you can remove them after 3 meetings. Well, 3 meetings is kind of short. I typically, like, if they haven't showed up in 3 meetings, just shoot them an email, say, hey, is something going on? You know, we haven't heard from you and you're supposed to be notifying us. They will typically, you know, apologize profusely, promise to be better, and then they're usually better for a couple weeks and then they're not. You'll know when you're at the point that, okay, this person really needs to be kicked down. And so I have those 2 email letter templates that I showed you before that I'll also provide you, and you can use them and customize them as you want. But it pretty much, if you have someone who's been active and they're clearly no longer engaged with the work group, it's worded in such a way they could tell you, you know, my job has changed. I'm not doing this anymore. Please remove me. Okay, that's easy. You just take them off. Or they may say, yeah, I want to be an authorized observer. And the reason when you want to do this is if they're an active member, it's more work for you as co-chairs to keep tracking their attendance. And then you're going to have to go into NENA Workspace eventually and update them there. And that's extra work you don't need. So it's actually in your benefit to either make sure they stay engaged or be kind of, you know, move them off into the authorized observer category. Everything for them is exactly the same, except they don't have to tell you they're not coming to the call, and you don't have to worry about tracking them down. And then you can just say they were absent in NENA Workspace. And you don't even have to record them other than when they do show up on a meeting in the attendance tracking spreadsheet. They no longer can vote, which is probably in your benefit too, because if you don't have enough of a quorum and you have to recirculate ballots, or you may get to the point where you just can't get a document forward because the people are no longer engaged at all. So it's kind of on you to keep that up to speed. What else do we have? So this is some, you know, things to take into consideration. How long, you know, the 3 strikes and you're out is kind of up to you guys, but how long have they not notified you? Have you been good about letting, you know, poking them and reminding them? If it's somebody who's really contributed to the work group and they're just swamped, you're going to get some people who are really good with that. You don't necessarily want to get rid of them, but you need to work out something with them so they're at least reminding you, we don't care if you just email us every week and say you can't come. We don't want to lose you as an active voting member. And that's something just to figure out how you want to deal with once you get to that point. Maybe you guys will be lucky and you won't have any people like that. That would be really good. And if you do send them a note, then you're going to want to make sure that you give them a date to respond by, or you're just going to automatically move them down to that next level. And I've got the sample letters that I'll save you guys. And things to remember. Okay, what happens when you have to move them down? If you're just changing them to an authorized observer, it's just going into managing the membership, and you change them from a primary voter or an alternate voter to just an authorized observer, and then save that. That's all you need to do there. If you're actually removing them from the work group, you have to take them out of the NENA Workspace. You have to look at voting roles if they were in an organization with multiple people, and if they were the primary voter, you're going to have to change the voting role of the other person. Now, if there were 3 from the same organization, they were the primary voter and they left, well, you have 2 alternate voters. One of those has to be primary, so you're going to have them work it out who's going to be primary and update that. And then kind of as a last thing to do, if you really kick someone off the group who's not been active or whatever, is I check to see, are they on other work groups? Because if this was the only work group that they were ever on, you might want to just let Delane know so she can archive that account or deactivate it. Right now, there's something like 2,000 members that are in the work group. And I think a lot of people are joining and they're on for one work group. And then if they don't stay engaged, they just kind of sit out there. And I think NENA pays per license or something, or maybe they're now in a group license. I'm not 100% certain. I don't know if Sandy or Pete, if you know what that is.
I don't know, huh?
Yeah, and to see if somebody, let's see if I can show you real quick. How do you know what community, oh shoot, what community somebody's in? Make this big. So if I go to RCL, you can go into members and you can just pick on any person who's in there. Oh, Rachel's back. So we'll click on Rachel. You can go under connections, and then there's a communities, and you'll see which groups that they're actually associated with. So you want to actually look for stuff that's a work group. And so you can see here's a work group, here's a work group. There are other multiple work groups. So you don't want to tell Delane they could, be removed. But if it was somebody who was only on your work group and they were the only reason they got a new NWS account, that could be something just out of courtesy for her to let her know. Okay,
I
so
know.
that was,
Yeah,
yep, go
I
ahead.
know that like, I had been on a work group and I resigned and, did all that. But the minute I came back on last year to the current work group I'm in, all of the notifications keep coming back. And it still says I'm part of that other work group. So I actually, in the beginning of this call, sent Delane something saying, because I don't see how I can excuse myself from it. Because you can't do that as a person. The chair or somebody else has to do it, right?
I thought there might be a way. Let me get into one of my work groups. We're gonna hack through this, but I thought you can go into settings and you can leave community.
Let's try, because I was sitting here playing with this. Let's see. Oh, I can. Look at that. Okay.
Yep.
But I just need to make sure I'm under the work group, not anything else,
Yes,
right?
under that
Yeah.
community, because you don't
Okay.
want to be in your one that you're a co-chair of.
All right, I just did it. So
That's not
let's see if
allowed.
everything else is, no. I just, because I felt bad because I was like, I keep getting these notifications and, all right, perfect. I just
Yep.
did it.
See, it was worth the price of admission today, right?
Oh, and Delane already answered me.
The same thing,
It
or to remove you.
was something about Gary's emails. I'm just clicking on Delane's name. I'll send her another. I just sent it to her. I didn't bother you guys. Will you like, Cheryl told me how to do it.
Yeah, so she's wanting to know, which email address Gary wants to use. The one that's tied to NENA Workspace, which I guess is his work one, and then the other one that I had copied to, and because Gary had sent two of them, and
Yeah, what's currently in workspace is fine. We don't need to change it.
okay.
At least I'm not fired yet. So when that happens, then I'll have to change it.
Ouch. Mm.
Yeah, this is the add or invite others. You would go into here, and then this big, you go into invite others, and you can search for anyone's particular name, and can do like part of a name, and it will give you things. Pete, you want to be on the RCL stewardship work group? Woo-hoo. You add them to the list, and then you have to click again and then say add immediately, which I won't do to him. And then there's a step where it asks you how often they should get notices, and it should be real time. You want them to receive them as they come through. They have the option of going in and changing that themselves if they're really getting bombarded by them, but you want to send it to that. And then it's the manage members where you actually go in and you have to assign them their role, the user, a producer, or general interest.
Where's the manage members button? I'm just trying to look for it.
Yeah, okay, so let me go back to the community and get out of this. So when you go under settings, you see where members is here under administration.
That's where you do it. Okay.
Yep. So if let's see, I'll just pick a person. You can pick any person, and then the select action is edit roles and submit. And here's where you, like if you were changing someone to an authorized observer, you would click authorize observer and unclick these other ones.
Okay.
Or if they're actually an authorized observer and they really get engaged and they really, I'm here every week, can I be a work group member? Then you would just work group member, whatever their voting role is.
Now down there under moderator, what's the moderator?
Don't touch these. These
Okay.
are anything in gray. I kind of leave that to Delane if she needs to
Okay.
do them. I would just cancel out of that.
See, that's why that's how you have to don't do
Yep.
that. Got it.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know exactly.
It's the red
what they
button. You don't
do.
want to push it.
Well,
Exactly.
I'm glad I'm like, whoa, okay, clearly, don't do it. Got it.
We'll probably have to put in our instructions, don't touch them, is my guess.
And then
Any-
generally after, so what I do so I don't forget is after I add the member, then I go and I make sure that they get added to the calendar invites through managing the roster. And that's how you register them for their calendar invites for all the events.
Yep, manage the events. Yep.
Yeah.
But they still have to go in and download the calendar locally themselves, but you have to register them for the events. They technically can register themselves, I think, but they really don't know how or don't do it. And it's just easier if the co-chair does that.
So if you so under status, because I'm playing in our work group, add or invite others. So that kind of if you know someone that you're trying to encourage to join the work group, you could literally invite them right there.
Oh yeah, if you were doing the add or invite others. Yep.
And then
can-
so under pending invitations, that's when you said they hit that big red button kind of thing. That's where those would go, right?
I've never seen, I've never used this one, but I would say that's probably where it is, but just based on what's written in here. So
Okay.
if you had invited others and you were requesting that they join versus you just putting them in there, I would assume that's where it goes.
That's where
And-
mine went.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, someone had joined the work groups but hadn't officially joined the group, and so I sent it that way.
Huh. So, oh boy. Yeah, I guess people could request to join and they may show up there. I've never really paid any attention, look for anything under here. I've had people who email me and said, hey, how do I join this work group? And all I do is navigate, have them, give them the direct link to where the form is on NENA.org. I've tried before to send them to the page and say, click on the red button. And honest to God, I think I had 3 emails with this one person who just didn't realize we were the second work group down. And he kept sending email invitations. I think it was to Brandon's 3D GIS vertical location work group. And I had to contact them and say, have you gotten a bunch of requests for this person? And they go, yeah, we added him a month ago. I says, well, you can take him out because he hasn't showed up at your meetings, right? Yep. Well, he was trying to join our work group and didn't realize there's multiple work groups on the same page. Any other questions about members adding, taking out? The manage events is where you would go to register them for the meetings too. And that I believe is documented in the NENA knowledge base development group guide. Okay.
Where,
Yep, go ahead.
where do you create the events? Is
You
it up there in
create
that
them.
setting?
It
Under-
is.
Says manage events. Is that, do you just go in there and you?
So if you're going to create an event in NENA Workspace, actually the easiest thing to do is under the development group guide, there is, uh-oh, the cat is getting hangry. He's getting angry early. There is this conference calls. So scheduling conference calls, and we're going to have to make this, I think, bigger text because it's so far buried, but there's see detailed instructions here. And this is a nice page where it actually walks you through the whole process and has nice screen captures of everything that's in there.
And that will put it on that front home big calendar as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. When you do it through this way, it'll help you. It's a good thing my camera's not on because somebody decided to sit in my lap and play with the computer.
That's fantastic.
But yeah, you can see it has all kinds of instructions. And for the last month or so, the way we had this set up where you could copy this HTML text and it sets up your meeting appointments really nice, and you just have to change a few things here and there, wasn't working, but it's working again. But yeah, it's all detailed. And then it tells you at the how to register the people for those meetings, and it walks through the process and what you have to click on and manage roster and add the registrants, and then clicking all the people. And then there's, even if in the future you have to change a meeting information, it gives you information on how to do that here too. So that's a very long page and why we threw it off to another site, but finding it is, you have to know where to look for it right now.
Okay.
All right, anything else about meetings or attendance?
One more thing on meetings. So Gary and I had kind of tentatively looked at a time. We looked to make sure it didn't conflict. Sandy, do we need you and Pete's blessing or anything else before we put that out there?
The announcement for work group members?
Or just the scheduling the time, or do we put work group members first before? Let me back up. I think what you've said throughout these last couple hours is let's try to get work group members and say tentatively, this is our time before we schedule anything. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, you can go ahead and build your event, but like Cheryl said, if you build your event saying
And
we're
you
going
have
to
to
start this
cancel it.
day, but then you push it back, you got to cancel the whole
Right.
series.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
I
would do
think-
your announcement first.
Yeah, let's do our announcement with the date, the day and time, so we can get work group volunteers. And then once we close
Right.
that window, we can push that notification out with the invites, with the link to the Zoom meeting.
Yep, that's a good way to do it.
Good.
Anything else with those? The next stuff I'm going to go over is going to be very short, because this is just going to be high level. And once you get to doing commenting, we can do another training session a couple months down the road. Okay, so over the next however many months you're going to be involved in, there's a couple opportunities for you guys to use NENA events to help you move your document forward, or whether it's getting more volunteers to be on the group, or if you want to solicit some feedback from folks. So you're going to want to, we'll talk briefly about them and then just give you an overview of the comment review process on what you need to do in order to have the document ready for it. What do you do with comments coming back? How do you update the document? And doing that whole comment response period, and at the very end doing your ballot voting. So the key thing to note about what events are available, well, you have your standards and best practices conference. There's one coming up in January. So if you're pretty far along, but you've got some things hanging out there and you want to have a session to either A, expose people to things, or B, solicit feedback, or C, if you're struggling with membership and need more members, you could use that. And then the NENA annual conference is not until June, but hopefully you guys won't be still going that long. But if you are, you could do it for, put in for a session for that. Or maybe it's you finished your document and now you want to present it to folks, and there's important information that are in your document that you want to get out. That's an option too. And then there's a joint committee meeting that's coming up in October. It's actually going to be in Illinois, outside of Chicago, in Wheaton, Illinois, I think it is, which is where the ITT Technical Center is. And if you have something that you feel falls over multiple work groups, not just you and one other group, but multiple work groups where you feel it really needs input from a bunch of different people, that's an opportunity that you could ask for input as part of the discussion, and have some kind of opportunity to get something hammered out that maybe you guys have struggled with and just have not come to a good decision, and would benefit from having NDG input on that. So then the actual comment review process. So what is going to happen is, once your document is sent out for comment review, you have to get your document ready for the work group. And so there's an easy way to go in. You can download all the comments into an Excel spreadsheet so that you can keep track of them there. If you've gotten a tracked changes document, somebody went through and instead of submitting individual comments, they just gave you a document back. You have to be able to take all them and put them into one document so you're not bouncing around. You have everything in one place. If you get a document where somebody's dumped comments into a version of the document, and they may have, I had this happen before too, there's 40 comments that were in there. They're very, they have the comment, they have suggested text. You still need to deal with them. And one way that you can do them is give them each a number. And this probably hasn't been updated in here correctly, but you could give it a number based upon whatever their main number was. So let's say they uploaded the document and it was comment 2000. We'll just use an even number. So what you can do is number within the document each of their individual comments. So this is comment 2000-1, 2000-2. So you have all of them in there. And that's a way that you can accept or reject kind of, I'm air quoting, individual comments that they put in there without having to go into NENA Workspace and enter them all separately. There's no need for you to redo any of that work, but you need a way to be able to tell the person that, hey, we accepted or rejected this, especially if somebody gave you a track changes document where they think they're all just editorial type changes, because some of them you may stumble upon and say that wasn't an editorial change, it's really a substantive change. So you need a way to be able to differentiate them. When you combine all these comments and you're putting them into your master document, now you also have a separate comment number for that, and you can track it in that particular fashion. One of the things that you're going to get a lot of typically is people who like to look for those typos and grammar errors. And rather than looking at each of them individually, you can look at them as co-chairs and say, hey, all of these ones are just, they're editorial. They don't change the meaning. It's punctuation's wrong, or there's a capitalization issue, or this is a better word. We want to just blanket accept them. So in those particular cases, what I've done is gone in and like color coded the comment green or color coded it blue. And then you just do one blanket vote. You tell the work group, we've gone in, we've color coded it this week. On next week's call, we want you to look at it beforehand to make sure that you agree with all these changes that we're recommending. And we'll do one vote to accept all of them. So that gives people the opportunity to A, look at it, or B, if they didn't look at it, they're trusting you guys, which is probably what's going to happen anyways, but you've done that official validation by the work group, which for your document being ANSI is an important process. You considered every comment that was in there, but instead of having to look at each of those individually, you're doing it as a blanket vote. The other thing that you might want to do to make the comment review process go a little bit faster for you is that you can, as co-chairs, come up with a proposed way to deal with something. And sometimes it is, yeah, we propose we accept the text, or you might hit something, you say, we really think the work group needs to discuss this, and you may not have a proposed solution to it. But anything you can do to help move things along usually is appreciated by the work group and makes your life a little bit easier. That's kind of the stuff that you do in those post-call planning sessions. It's like, okay, we got through this week. What do we want to have on the agenda for next week? What can we try to knock off and finish and get through those? If you get somebody who does send one of those track changes documents with a lot of comments in, or they individually submit a lot of comments, it is often helpful to invite them to the work group calls where you're going to discuss their comments for two reasons. A, maybe they misunderstood something. And this will help give them better clarification of why you may end up rejecting a comment or responding to it in different wording than they're proposing. Or B, they may put something in there and you're kind of stuck not really understanding what they mean. So you can question them during that call and get out of them a better explanation of what their concern was. I have been on different work groups, and I found that as you address a comment, that spreadsheet you've created where you've downloaded all the comments, if that day you actually go in and you write up the response to that and keep track of it in there, a couple months later when you finish going through 50 comments, you don't have to go back and remember what the work group said. You've already got it there. You're able to then hit the ground running and copy paste them into the NENA workspace and send out their comments, responses. If you do the Excel file, you can post it each week as a version of the previous one. And what I've done is when they go to approve the notes, right after that, I say, and we're also going to approve the proposed responses to the commenters. Is there any objections to approving them as written or suggestions for modifications to the response? And that way you've kind of dotted your I's, you crossed your T's for the ANSI process. Everyone agrees with the response. So when you finish all those comments, again, it's a simple copy paste out and put into the system. There's no extra thinking about it. It's just running through and checking boxes.
Do you have like a example of that? Because I feel I'm a little confused by it, but I think if I saw something, it would make more sense.
Yep. Let me pull one up real quick. I'll grab one for our, how about I do our data model document? So we had comments that came in.
And this is really comments during the work group, or is this like the public comment part?
This is like the all committee review and public review.
Okay.
And it automatically, I've got columns hidden here, but it does a dump from the master database. And it's, you know, primarily when you're doing it, you're looking at their comment, their proposal, and their response is what you're going to fill in here. And so these columns will be filled out, but this one isn't. So if I pulled out an earlier version of the document, you can see I have empty ones here where we haven't resolved them yet, but we put right in here, thank you for your comment. And you know, your comment was accepted as proposed or accepted with modifications. And what I've found is helpful for me as someone who's had to manage these before is whatever you're going to talk about, you put them in the order that you're covering them in the meeting, and then you highlight them a yellow. So what you're asking the work group the next week is the stuff that was highlighted yellow was the updates. Are you good with our proposed responses? And then when you create the version for the next week, you push them to the bottom. And so anything you've already done is at the bottom, and stuff that's still left to do is white. And that kind of gives the work group a sense of how many more of these things do we have to do?
And then eventually you're submitting this file for your ANSI accreditation or whatever that you've tracked every comment or whatnot, right?
Well, you don't have to submit this file. What you have to do is respond back to NENA Workspace. But
On each
because you have your response here, you can copy it out of here and dump it real easily into NENA Workspace.
And the A column, those are generated by that's generated somehow.
Yep, that's the NENA Workspace. When someone submits a comment, it's given the next number in the system.
Okay.
And you'll find if you have your document out for review, when there's another document out, you will have gaps in your numbers because people were submitting comments for a different document.
Okay.
So don't panic if you see like it went from 82 to 85. Well, 83 and 84 may be on a GIS document somewhere else in the system.
Thank you.
Yep. And there will be more detailed information about the responses that are in the system by the time you guys get to it in the NENA knowledge base. It looks like this right now, but I think these responses might need some more fleshing out. And just a note, remember you're going to give them must respond within 10 business days, give them that due date. If they don't respond back to then, you can go into NENA Workspace, say, well, it's accepted because they didn't respond. And then you just put a note in there that says no response from commenter by due date of whatever. And that way you're not holding up moving forward with that. Once you've got everything resolved, that's when you then do your ballot vote to go to the next phase, or hopefully for you guys, it'll just be the final approval ballot. And as far as ballot voting, one primary organization, Delane is setting up templates for a lot of these. You might be lucky in that your committee or the work group itself may already have a template in there. So before you create a ballot, that might be something that you want to look for. But again, I won't spend any time really going over this. Sandy's done these a couple times too. But when you get there, we can go through on how to do that.
Okay.
And there are some guidelines in the knowledge base about it. Again, we'll be updating them as time goes through. And that was it. That's what I had.
I have 2 more questions for you.
Mhm.
Can you go back to the workspace? Not the wiki, but the workspace.
You want to go to a live version of it? Yep.
Yeah. And when you go into, I feel like I'm losing my mind because as I was following along, I went into all communities and I went down to the administrative procedure templates and training material. And early on when I was following you, I went into workspace. Watch, it's going to work now that I'm asking you this. And I kept looking for that 001 document that we've referred to several times and I wanted to read it. Well, I can't find it now. So I don't know what I'm doing
Okay.
wrong.
So in this one, when you go into procedures,
Right.
into the workspace and open up the document templates.
Oh, I'm stuck on forms. That's what I did
Yep.
wrong. Okay.
Yep.
Thank
And I
you.
believe that was in the published documents folder.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what it was. All right.
yeah, I was looking at this too because I'm like, well, we published all our forms. I didn't realize there was a forms in there as well. So we may need to look at these labels and see if when we go to what we end up putting up into the NENA knowledge base as part of the guide also need to be in here because people don't necessarily need to go into the guide to find things. They should be also able to find them here.
Well, I've noticed if you play with that little that little thing that you're pointing at right now, it's really hard to get it to reset. I just realized, I think I finally got it to go back to folder navigator, but I'm on some of my other work groups. It doesn't see that and it's stuck on whatever it is.
You have to go back to all folders to get it to go back to the
Okay.
folder navigator. Otherwise, it remembers where you last were, which in some cases that might be a good thing.
Okay.
Okay.
That was one question. And now the other
Mhm.
question. Now, if you want people to join the working groups, you have to go to the actual NENA website, right?
Yes.
And then they have to go in and say, join this work group.
Right. So under committees, development group committees, you guys are under which one? PSAP, logistics or ops?
I think we're under operations.
Ops. Yeah, PSAP ops.
Yep. So you have multiple work groups here.
And we're not listed yet because it's probably not live or whatever, right?
Correct. So once you think you're going to be ready for the announcement, then we'll get, Delane will just need like a description of your work group and that you're going to want to post here to join.
Okay.
And look at what they did and some of the other ones and, kind of borrow heavily from kind of like the format of what's in there.
Well, like I noticed on that one that's like right below, there's no date on it. And I think you should always put the like what day.
Yes.
That really will decide whether or not you're going to join the work group, right?
Right. And that's a great way to make sure that you're not going to be adding people and then having to remove them later on for non-attendance. So let them know when they're meeting, what the day of the week, what the time, and then you can give an estimated starting date. But the time should be legit. But
Yeah.
but you can beginning, we anticipate, whatever date you want to choose.
But there's nothing on here to suggest like when these, like this one that's down, it says meetings will be held to be determined by members of the work group. Is that just because it's a new one? Or if I click on that red button, am I really joining the work group yet? If I wanted to like,
They will, but personally, I think that's a bad thing to do.
okay.
Because if you really need to get people who are able to commit to the time and date,
Totally.
and it's really, you guys are the ones who are having to do all the heavy lifting. So it's really when you guys are available. So you find what works best for you, where it's not overlapping with other NENA work group meetings that may pull key people from attending your meetings.
Okay.
And don't worry about the members, because then if they can't commit to that day and time, they're not going to be helpful to you. They're just going to create more administrative overhead for you than you need.
Yeah, and if you need help, the one that just above operationalizing, the one just above it is the one that I co-chair.
Mhm.
And we can help you out.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
all these pieces. It's like, you really are jumping in, like the wiki, the actual, there's just a lot of pieces. So I just wanted to make sure I had them all down. So,
And the
Yep.
biggest confusion that work group members will go through is they'll say, but I'm logged into NENA, but are you logged into NENA workspace? Because they'll say,
Yep.
I didn't get the agenda, or I can't join the meeting, and the first thing is, are you logged into NENA workspace? And hands down, that's always the problem.
and is there any way from the NENA website to link? Is there a link that says NENA Workspace?
Not that I'm aware of.
no.
Okay. I finally, I mean, because I was in that, but I finally just started, bookmarking the NENA dev site, and then I was like, okay, I get it now.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's really important on the first call to show them the NENA workspace. If you've got new users, and if other people have been on NENA workgroups before, unless they've been a co-chair, they probably can use the refresher, because I think a lot of people just don't go in and access the system. You can actually go in and look at someone and see the last time they were in the system and interacted with it as a co-chair.
Okay.
Surprise, surprise. So you can see who's not been really doing stuff.
Okay.
And that's why I recommend in the instructions, you tell people to bookmark the site, because then they have no reason not to get to it directly.
And to stay logged in.
Yep. And to stay logged in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
about the only thing I didn't see that was covered was for your agendas and your notes about going in after the vote and marking it as final, changing it from a draft state to a final.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And I don't even know if that's in the instructions in the knowledge base. That's a good point. So what she is saying is, if I went to, I'll go in data model. So if you're in workspace, here's, okay, I'll just use this one that's a draft. Let's say that this was, even though it's a draft workgroup documents, if it was notes, when you put something in, it's a state of draft. When you have your next meeting and the work group approves it, before you post your next meeting notes, what you should do is go in, and where they have modified details, this is where you can game the system. That's what I call it, is you can go down and find your state, and you can change it from draft to final. But when you do that, make sure that this box isn't checked. It should default when it's just a modify not to, and submit changes. And now you'll notice that this says final.
There's another way to do it as well. So if you click on the document that you want to change, now click on the little X, I'm sorry, the little box on the edge.
Which box on the edge?
So go back,
The little square
little square.
This one?
under
Yeah,
D.
click, you should click that and then go up to where it says download, and it should say change state
Oh, okay.
and apply action.
See, I didn't even know that.
And then it will let you choose the state that you want to set it to.
Let's see. Draft. I'll send it back to draft.
Put it back to draft.
Oh, so when you've screwed up and you have 50 meetings, you can just select all and do that?
Yeah, so select all your previous notes and, go in and select every single one. And then you can go to that change, go up to that and change the state. Because you'll
Oh.
forget, hands down.
I wish I'd known about that before, because I went in and had to manually do a whole bunch of ones.
And then the only other thing, and I actually have a meeting at the top of the hour, was and I haven't learned how to do this yet. So Cheryl, maybe you can show me and we'll add it to a video, is going in and for, how you manage your attendance in your spreadsheet. Well, not everybody goes in and manages their attendance through that RSVP link, and then having to go back in and getting that caught up. Now that should be done. My understanding is weekly. I have one of my work groups that I've never done it. So I got a whole heavy lift to get to when it comes to
Yep.
ballot time.
And they can do that. You just go into manage events, and you want to go for past events, apply your filter. And then if you can start either with the oldest meeting or you can do it the latest meeting. And then you just manage the roster. And here's where your attendance is
Okay.
for that meeting. And you can go in and you do the ups and downs.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I've got a-
that's something, you know, the first couple meetings, be really heavy on them. And then after a month, go in and see if you haven't been able to keep up with attendance, who's not marking it, and send them a note. Because it takes them 5 seconds at the beginning of the call and they're just creating more headache for you.
And I do announce at the beginning of my meetings, folks, make sure you go in and click that link. If you don't do it, then I have to do it. And I already have so much to do to manage this work group. And I'd really appreciate if that workload could be taken off me. And, but yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, I'm sure I have a million, but not right now.
Everyone's head hurt?
Yeah, wait until we start getting into it. Then they'll just flow.
Well, no, I know that's why I was like, I need to register these meetings. I need to try this. And I'm like, wait, back up. Let's find some worker bees first.
Yep. So I will send you guys the 4 documents that I have in draft form so you have something to start with and not have to reinvent the wheel.
Okay.
If any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Be happy to help.